That girl was so pathetic. Even her own family took advantage of her. That girl was Lunathia Hassel, the second daughter of the Hassel family. She was forced to get up when her brother loudly called her name. The eldest son, Soleil, greeted her with his dazzling smile. He plopped down on the middle of the bed and said he had a big exam today. He was about to earn the right to become a knight, just like their father wanted. That's why he started begging Lunathia to take a peek into the future for him. He only ever talked to her when he needed something, like right now. Lunathia tried to explain how serious the consequences of doing that could be. Even so, he kept on asking her to just tell him the answers. The girl was about to say she wasn't feeling well, but her sister cut her off. Rosalind showed up with Cynthia and immediately started showering her sister with kind words. Rosalind stepped closer and criticized Lunathia for still being in bed. She added that she came to wake her up, so their dad wouldn't get upset. Lunathia tried to explain why, but she was instantly interrupted. Rosalind called it normal that she covers for her little sister's screw-ups. All those words instantly infuriated the exhausted girl. Her older sister immediately started playing her, demanding she read her future in return. She held out her hand and started talking about her big deal tomorrow. She wanted to know if the mine she's planning to buy will pay off. She smiled, going on about how she was doing it all for the sake of their family. Lunathia tried to argue again, explaining that it was draining her energy. Cynthia looked worried, thinking Luna was coming down with something. She asked to see her future 3 days from now, instead of Rosalind's. She was interested in something trivial, like the dresses the ladies-in-waiting would wear to the ball. She wanted to show up in a dress that would really turn some heads. After that, they all started bickering about whose future would be read. Each of them brought up arguments that they thought were super important. Finally, they all stared at their sister like a pack of vultures. In every generation of the Hassel family, a child was born with the ability to see the future. The dude had this massive birthmark on his chest, proof positive. This ability was the family's trump card, but even they weren't supposed to use it too much. The Lunatias abused it, which is why her right eye went blind. Rosalind, the older sister, was the family's first golden child. Soon after, Lunatia was born, followed by the long-awaited son, Soleil. Even though they were twins, the parents loved him way more. They pretty much forgot Lunatia existed, just left her to rot. 5 years later, Cynthia popped out, and everyone was blown away by how gorgeous she was. And just like that, they were a happy family. One she wasn't part of. She was just a shadow compared to the beloved Hassel kids. They only remembered Lunathia after her power woke up, which she was thrilled about. Soon, their greed led to her body starting to fall apart. One day, she overheard that a certain marquise was looking for a bride. Everyone predicted this lucky woman would live in luxury and pampering. Those words allowed Lunathia to see hope in Marquis Iltern. He was a pretty headstrong war hero and a total knockout. His assistant Urin playfully announced that he'd brought another letter. Iltern Knox immediately started reading the letter from the Viscount's daughter. The man calmly told his assistant to send a polite rejection. Urin bluntly asked how long he was going to keep this up. They knew damn well he was covering for his buddy the prince, who was out hunting for a bride. He chuckled and suggested he should just get hitched instead of messing with these young women. Lord Knox didn't bite at the jab, just tossed the letters away. Urin scrambled to pick up the pages and noticed something weird about the new letter. Looks like that awkward comment actually got the guy's attention. Urin figured the letter was from the young lady herself, not her old man. All this pointed to the fact that the Hassel family's daughter herself wanted to be his wife. Urin agreed, concluding that she was definitely super interested. Iltern Knox was deep in thought, like he was weighing his options. Finally, he shot up and ordered them not to reply to that girl. Urin asked sarcastically if he actually wanted to meet her in person. The guy just shrugged on his coat, saying that woman could cure his boredom. From that moment on, not a single day passed in Lunathia without her thinking about that letter. This man was known as the Moon Eater, and he had a serious reputation. Despite his fame, he cashed out and built a mansion far from civilization. There were always whispers about him because of his, let's just say, risky behavior. Some even said he was capable of leaving an enemy to face a very unpleasant situation. As soon as everyone heard he was looking for a bride, nobles started flooding him with letters. Lunathia knew she had to impress him because she wouldn't last long in her own family. Looks like the maid noticed her mood change and decided to ask what was up. Lunathia wasn't about to spill her guts about what was eating her up inside. The staff already knew her fiancé was coming over today to hammer out the details of their arrangement. Suddenly, the girl remembered one huge snag. She'd inherited memoirs from her ancestors, and she was duty-bound to keep writing in them. The problem was, little Soleil had dropped the damn book in the pond. Lunathia managed to salvage some entries that warned about the risks of overdoing it. It said that eventually, a person could lose all 5 senses. And it was true, because now she was blind in one eye. She remembered how much of a jolt that new info had been. It was a real struggle for her to wrap her head around the fact that she could be wrecking herself. She caught a glimpse of her reflection, twisted with fear. Lunathia had never done this before, but this was it, the moment. For the first time, she decided to find out what her own future held. The girl touched the mirror and asked it to show her what she desired. In the next instant, she felt everything around her swallowed by absolute darkness. Suddenly, she realized she couldn't feel a thing. Her body and mind were like in a vacuum, the kind that makes life impossible. The memoirs stated that a person who lost one of their senses would eventually lose all the others. After reading this, Lunathia decided to accept her fate and put the book aside. Now, she wanted to live this year exactly how she wanted, so she wouldn't have any regrets later. She was so lost in thought, she didn't even notice anyone around. The girl practically jumped out of her skin when she felt someone grab her. Standing right in front of her was Rondel Alaudi, an Imperial Knight from the 2nd Division. Lunathia was quick to scold him for sneaking up on her like that. The guy saw her annoyed expression and figured she was ticked off. He smirked and said he just wanted to check in on his bride-to-be. Rondel also threw in that Soleil and Cynthia would be happy to see him too. At first, she thought this guy was kind, understanding, and someone she could be good friends with. She used to think nobody would ever demand anything from her again. Lunathia decided to cut to the chase and asked him for a favor. Called it! All he wanted was a sneak peek at his future. Once again, she saw he couldn't care less about how she was feeling. His family was famous for producing legendary knights, generation after generation. Even so, Rondel wasn't exactly a natural when it came to swordsmanship. As her future husband, he constantly exploited her gift, and it got him pretty far. She wanted to ditch her, and that's why she needed a new husband in the first place. Meanwhile, he kept trying to pull strings to get what he wanted. Lunathia felt such a wave of disgust, she wanted to scream. She wanted to argue, but the maid announced that a letter had arrived. The girl froze instantly, guessing it was from that man. She flipped a switch and told Rondel he was off the hook, just like that. He started to argue, but she gave her fiancé a cold goodbye. After that, she completely forgot about him and got down to writing. She glanced at the letter and realized it was from the Moon Eater. That very night, the girl headed to his creepy-ass mansion. The Marquis invited her for a private meeting, which shocked the family. Not long before, she'd brought up the meeting with them over dinner. The man was stunned and asked if she even knew what she was saying. He was blown away by his own daughter's unusual resolve. He slammed his fist on the table, reminding her how crucial their alliance with Alaud's son was. Nicholas Hassel was absolutely livid about his daughter's decision. The girl tried to stay calm and asked him to hear her out. She reached for her glass, but she was shaking too much to grab it. Lunathia realized she'd bumped a knife, and it clattered to the floor. Nicholas sighed, totally done, and called his daughter clumsy. He waved his hand at a servant and told her to replace the silverware. The guy's face darkened as he started listing all the ways she'd screwed up. He added that she owed it to her family to help them by reading their futures. She was disgusted that that's all he ever talked about. His wife, Sanrea, jumped in to back up her husband's words. She brought up Rosalind, who started her own business and provides for her family. Even Soleil is busting his butt to become a high-ranking knight for the sake of our family. She even mentioned Cynthia, who's carefully searching for her future husband. The old lady concluded that Lunathia should also be doing something for the family. She brought all this up just to refuse my request to break off the engagement. Rosalind immediately asked if I'd had a falling out with Rondel. Cynthia chimed in, saying that we shouldn't call off the engagement. Soleil mentioned how Rondel was there for me during tough times. All their words just confirmed to Lunathia that they don't care about what I want. Finally, Nicholas stood up and said he needed to think about my proposal. After that, all the family members left the room, leaving her alone. Lunathia didn't know if she should tell them about the Moon Eater's invitation. She knew for damn sure she couldn't afford to back down now. She had to use the fact that she'd caught the eye of someone like that. After a while, they finally arrived at the warrior's castle. The girl was happy and tried to get down, but she twisted her ankle. She quickly grabbed the door to keep from falling on her face. She felt, once again, how inconvenient it was to live with only one eye. The coachman tried to explain how dangerous this area was. He suggested she not go any further if she was that scared. Still, she had this sudden feeling. like she was born to be right here, right now. She said goodbye to the driver, thanking him for the ride. Lunathia smiled and wished him a future filled with good times and good fortune. Meanwhile, the Marquis was already getting hyped up for their meeting. Urin asked, "Does me being here really make you that happy?" He was right, and just a couple minutes later, she was standing right in front of him. Lunathia gave a polite greeting to Marquis Iltern. She walked forward, not even noticing there was a table in her way. Next thing you know, she tripped and almost ate it hard. She gave a sheepish grin and said, "Whoops, guess I'm not watching where I'm going." The guy clocked instantly that she was blind in her right eye. He stared hard at the girl, like he needed to be absolutely sure. Lunaria figured she should cut to the chase. She looked him dead in the eye, totally serious, and asked him to marry her. The offer was so out of left field, it froze him solid. The guy stated coldly that he wasn't planning on getting hitched anytime soon. He also said he started the rumor to keep from losing his position as head of the family so early. Hearing that, she guessed he wouldn't want to hand things over to his brother. She gently touched his hand, like she was trying to reel him in. The guy went still when she squeezed his hands and brought them up to her face. She finally worked up the nerve to reveal her secret gift of foresight. Lunaria took his hands again, saying she only needed to touch someone. That's all it took for her to see any point in their future. The guy immediately wondered if the legends about her family were actually true. Lunaria repeated that she was offering him a marriage of convenience in exchange for a daily forecast. She added that he'd have the right to, end things when she became a burden. The girl talked about it so casually, it was almost disturbing. The Marquis said she was awfully calm for someone proposing a deal with such final consequences. He was surprised by how much she wanted to become part of his family. The girl just answered him with a silent smile and a calm nod. The guy sighed and said she was the most interesting candidate he'd seen so far. His answer instantly cheered up the desperate girl. He suddenly turned grim and told her she needed to prove it, right then and there. Lunaria echoed his demand and said she'd do whatever he wanted. Then, she squeezed the warrior's hands tighter and braced herself. The girl froze, diving into the timelines. She immediately felt fragments of events crashing down on her. Finally, she opened her eyes and felt her body go limp. The girl collapsed right into the Duke's arms, like the vision had drained all her energy. She snapped back to consciousness and explained that it takes a lot out of you. The girl touched his chest and said the maid would bring his tea soon. She pointed at the rug and said she could just waltz in without asking and then take a tumble. Lunatia added that his assistant would catch her, no problem. She said if he fixed the rug, the future would change. She barely finished speaking when the maid burst into the room. She tried to push forward with the tray, but her foot got tangled in the rug. Next thing you know, she's eating floor, the tray goes flying, but she's okay. Lunatia saw that everything went according to plan and gave a sheepish smile. She declared meaningfully that this future was set in stone. Now all she had to do was eagerly watch the Marquise's reaction. Looks like everyone here is completely blown away. Finally, the guy smirks and says he gets it now. He didn't understand how any of this works, but he said he believed her. He told the maid to come back later, and that he didn't need any tea. He waited until they were alone, and declared that her gift was incredibly valuable. The Marquise suddenly remembered that she had brothers and sisters. On top of that, he also knew that Lunathia already had a fiancé. He caught her off guard by asking if this information was true. Urian immediately recalled that the Hassel family promised their second daughter to the Alaudi family's son. The girl froze when he mentioned the real reason for this arrangement. Finally, she admitted it was true, but she'd already filed for divorce. The Marquise was lost in thought, trying to figure out what was behind her sudden moves. Lunatia reached out her hand, asking him to help her with this decision. She stated firmly that she simply didn't want to be Rondel's partner. Looks like the guys were pretty shocked by her unexpected words. The Marquis even chuckled at the girl's simple reason. He asked if she'd actually come to him just for this. Lunatia froze when he said she'd taken a strong dislike to Count Alaudi's son. The girl smiled back at him, saying that was one way to put it. She added that she might not have another shot at a happy future. That's exactly why she went to see the sinister hermit, Marquis Knox. You could see her determination in her eyes, like she was carrying the weight of the world. Finally, Knox said that out of respect, he would take her as his wife. Lunathia was overjoyed and said it would be an honor to be with him. She bowed deeply and thanked him for putting his trust in her. The Marquis said he'd move her to his estate in a few days. He left after suggesting she stay in the castle for the night. The Marquise could tell how much she didn't want to go back to her family. Just mentioning her family made her all gloomy and sad. Before leaving, he told Yurin to get the lady the best room ready. The guy protested. Realizing they were dumping all the responsibility on him again, he turned to the girl, flashed a smile, and called Lunathia a sweetheart. On the way to her room, she was dissecting everything that just went down. She decided to keep the price she paid for her gift a secret. The girl figured out the Marquise wasn't as bad as the rumors made him out to be. Still, she had to head back to her place tomorrow. Since she was a kid, all she ever wanted was for someone to notice her. She blinked awake, barely remembering she'd already gotten home. The girl remembered her father's face, twisted with rage. He locked her in the cellar for leaving the house without their permission. Lunaria knew their family ties were nothing but a sham. When she discovered her powers, she was stoked, thinking everyone would finally love her. Back then, she had no clue what it would lead to, and carelessly blew through her strength. She wondered if Marquis Iltern would come for her, like he promised. The girl remembered how he told her not to get down before they parted ways. She apologized when he said he could read her like a book. He looked her straight in the eye and confidently said she was his wife now. The guy asked her to hold tight until he showed up so he could meet her folks. The girl got flustered by how forward he was and agreed again. She had no choice but to trust and wait for the Marquise. That night, his gorgeous eyes locked onto her with a fierce intensity. She was surprised to find she was almost happy to see those eyes, even at the end. One evening, the head honcho called everyone together to drop a bombshell. It had been a solid 5 days since he'd put Lunathia under house arrest. She barely touched any of the food the maids brought her. The guy just calmly said he wasn't letting her go until she apologized. The younger sister wondered where Lunathia had spent the night. Rosalind guessed she'd skipped town and crashed at a hotel. She also mentioned a huge deal was coming up soon with some new partners. Cynthia chimed in, saying she needed a reading too, before the ball. Sol couldn't wait any longer and got up to rush to Lunathia. He wanted to bolt out of the room, but bumped into a surprised Rundell. Like everyone else, he'd shown up to see Lunathia. The head of the house was instantly delighted to see his beloved fiancée. He spread his hands and begged him to forgive his silly little daughter. Rondell confessed he started freaking out when he got her letter breaking off the engagement. He wanted to find out how she was doing and understand why she was acting this way. He figured maybe he should apologize for not giving her enough attention. Nicholas perked right up, thinking that was exactly the reason. He started suggesting they just all sit down and talk together with his daughter. They froze when they heard the servants yelling in surprise. The servants were trying to stop the strangers, saying they couldn't just barge in like that. The Marquise was like, "Why are you telling me this?" He asked, all serious, "Doesn't anyone here know who I am?" The guy was carrying this huge bouquet of roses, while Yurin was trying to figure out who he was. Everyone was completely stunned when they realized it was the war hero. While everyone else was still in shock, Nicholas decided to start yelling. He demanded to know how he dared show up at the mansion with such disrespect. The guy told the Marquis to get out of the house, like, right now. He kept running his mouth until he finally realized who he was talking to. Nicholas didn't recognize his face. It was the coat of arms that clued him in. He went pale with fear and asked if he was really the Marquise. The rest of the family froze, waiting to see how this was going to play out. The Marquise apologized for showing up at their place unannounced like this. He introduced himself as Knox Iltern, the Moon-Eater Marquise. He dropped a bombshell, saying he was there to ask for Lady Lunathia's hand in marriage. Nicholas was seeing red when he heard that announcement. He tried to ask what kind of garbage he was spouting, but the Marquis held out his hand. Iltern clutched his chest and said he'd fallen head over heels for his daughter. Rondell immediately started yelling, saying there was no way in hell that was happening. He said Luna was promised to him and would never be his. Knox just replied that he'd already contacted his father, and he agreed to break off the engagement. That statement floored the guy and left him speechless. His assistant chimed in, saying they'd already taken care of the legal stuff. The letter from Count Alaudi stated that he wouldn't stand in the way of their love. Rondell couldn't believe his father caved to Marquis Knox. Turns out, a war hero had the right to intervene in the affairs of Imperial Knights. The Marquis explained his status and mentioned Lady Hassel's words. He quoted that she never wanted to be Rondell's partner. The guy immediately protested, saying that wasn't true and she would never have agreed to that. The Marquis just said he'd deal with the paperwork later. He turned to a maid and asked her to take him to Lady Hassel. He started to get pissed when he found out she was in the pantry. He asked why they were treating someone blind in one eye like that. Her parents immediately protested, saying she was perfectly healthy. Rondell backed them up, saying they would have known right away if that were the case. The Marquise realized that none of the girl's family gave a damn about her. He demanded again that he be taken to wherever they were keeping her. After that, he immediately followed the maid. Everyone else suspiciously watched the strange marquise. Looks like Cynthia was the only one who looked at him with joy and desire. Her heart fluttered at his handsome looks and impressive bearing. She crossed her arms, suddenly realizing he'd be perfect as her fiancé. Meanwhile, Luna was bored, packing her things while waiting for the marquise. She slowly sorted through her old dresses and everything that was in the storage room. She didn't want to take much with her and only managed to grab a couple of dresses. She also managed to snag the memoirs that somehow survived. That was all she could grab before they locked her up. Now she thoughtfully examined a piece of her former life. She gently ran her hand over the dress, as if feeling for something. In her hand was the brooch Rondell gave her last birthday. Now she realized he probably just told a servant to buy any old trinket. Everyone forgot her birthday that day, too busy congratulating Saleya, even though they were twins. That sad truth made her realize she didn't want to take it with her. She tossed the brooch aside and started packing the rest of her stuff. The girl froze when she heard a strange, distant noise. She felt a jolt of fear when the door slammed open. Lunathia couldn't believe the Marquis actually came for her. Her eyes widened, and a flicker of happiness started to glow in her heart. The Marquis held out flowers and said he came to take his beloved bride. Luna blushed, asking him what the heck he brought flowers for. The guy explained it was just a custom and suggested they head out. She quickly grabbed her bag and followed after him. She was even more surprised when he casually took her bag from her. Luna thanked him for the help, but he just froze right there. They turned around, hearing Nicholas shouting Luna's name. He was with Rondell, who also wasn't about to let her go. Luna stared at the guys who had never given her the time of day before. They swarmed her like vultures, not wanting to let their prize get away. All these people were pressuring her, trying to get some kind of answer. Rondell started shaking her by the shoulders, but she shoved his hand away. She finally found her voice and told him to shut his trap. Rondell froze, not believing Luna, who'd always been so compliant, was acting like this. After a short pause, Lunathia announced she wanted to marry Iltern. She added that from now on, she wouldn't use her powers at their beck and call. The girl told them to stop messing with her life. The Marquis said that from now on, they'd only be allowed to see her with his permission. He strictly forbade them from asking her to peek into their futures, like they used to. Nicholas couldn't believe she'd spilled her secret to the Marquis. Lunathia replied that they'd be family soon, and she didn't see any problem with it. Rondell ripped into the Marquis for only caring about the girl's abilities. He yelled at Luna to wake up and see who she was standing next to. The girl spat out, disgusted, that they were the ones who used her. She turned away and said she had nothing more to say to them. Knox asked if she was sure she didn't want to say goodbye to her family. She turned back and said that until this moment, they hadn't even acknowledged her blindness. She said a scornful goodbye to those she once considered family. After some time, they arrived at the Iltern residence. Just as Knox ordered, the best room was prepared for Lunathia. The girl was thrilled with such a beautiful and large room. They even thoughtfully put out a vase of water for the girl's flowers. Urin added that her personal maids would be by later. He smiled and suggested she get some rest before dinner. The girl reminded him that she was supposed to predict their future once a day. Knox Iltern said that he remembered the terms of their deal. He said that even though her gift was useful, she didn't have to use it every single day. The girl couldn't believe he was passing up such an opportunity. He waved his hand and said he'd ask her himself if he needed anything. The man hurried to leave her room with his assistant. The girl was suddenly alone again. She was floored they'd just hand her such a swanky room for nothing. She started racking her brain, trying to figure out why he suddenly refused the gift. Unlike her old man, he didn't think she had to grind away fulfilling her duty every single day. From now on, she wouldn't have to cater to the selfish demands of her family. All this was thanks to the only one who'd ever shown her any kindness. She smiled, thinking about how his gentle nature clashed with his intimidating reputation. Lunathia was just happy she could at least hear him. Meanwhile, Urin had also picked up on his kindness toward the girl. He started teasing him, saying his icy heart was finally thawing out. The guy reminded him that before he retired, he never turned down female attention. Back in the war, even the ladies of the night had nicknames for him, real passionate ones. Urin said he almost died laughing when he heard about it from the guys. Knox threatened to make him pay, then admitted the past is hard to shake. They were covered in their enemy's blood every day, watching their brothers fall one by one. The guy froze when Urin mentioned he'd be starting a family soon. He figured he couldn't just leave Miss Hassel to the wolves. That day, he noticed her hands trembling, scared stiff of her family. He could see it in the way she clutched that bouquet, fending off their accusations. It was the first time he'd felt such a powerful urge to protect someone. Right then, a knight ran up to him, yelling about trouble. Nox was spotted returning alone after scouting the forest. The guy was pretty beat up and covered in bruises, like they'd been jumped. Meanwhile, Lunathia was just getting acquainted with her new maid. The girl bowed with a cheerful smile, which surprised Lunathia. Her previous servants took care of her family every day, but she never had this kind of luxury. Rosalind said it was all for her own safety, but now, standing before her was her personal maid, ready to do anything. Lunathia was happy to see the young girl's enthusiasm. She said she was happy to meet her and returned a warm smile. After a while, Sierra asked if it was true that she was blind in her right eye. The girl immediately asked if the Marquise had told him about it. She guessed with a smile that that's exactly why she was chosen as a maid. She mentioned her sweetheart was one of Nox's men and lost an eye too. That meant Nox made sure she was qualified for the job ahead of time. 3 years ago, war came to their lands, and it lasted about 6 months. Amidst all the death, there was one guy who wouldn't back down, no matter what. Sierra figured that Nox was just looking out for her, making things easier. Lunathia blushed without even realizing it, touched by Nox's kindness. Everyone said he was a monster, but he turned out to be a really thoughtful guy. Sierra kept saying he was a wonderful person. She mentioned her boyfriend still serving him, even with his injury. Lunaria wondered why he needed soldiers, but got sidetracked by the offer of tea. Sierra bounced off, super eager to brew up some new, tasty tea. Luna was blown away by how genuinely kind Sierra was. She seemed kinda hyper at first, but even that was starting to grow on Luna. Once she was alone, she decided to get back to writing her memoirs. She'd regularly update her diary with new lines about how she was doing. The girl calmly wrote about how she didn't know how soon she'd lose her other senses. That's exactly why she wanted to keep writing down everything she needed to do this year. She was stoked to have made some awesome new friends. After a while, she finally finished. She spun the diary around a bit, then decided that was enough for today. Luna had written down everything she put up with back at her family's place. Still, now she had a real shot at making some new memories. Luna suddenly realized that Sierra still hadn't come back. She quickly cracked open the door and found the girl sobbing. She rushed over and tried to find out what was wrong. Turns out, her boyfriend Robert had suddenly gone missing. She'd been talking about him so lovingly just a little while ago, and now she was crying non-stop. Apparently, his squad was exploring the thick woods near the castle. Word was, their group ran into a swarm of blood-sucking bats. Lunaria was pissed that such dangerous creatures were living nearby. She remembered only reading about monsters like that in books. The girl figured they should send out a rescue party. Nox suddenly appeared behind her and said he was heading out to search. Luna felt a pang of worry, realizing he was going alone. He said he had to find Robert before nightfall. Lunaria turned her attention back to Sierra's bitter tears. She remembered how Sierra had talked about her sweetheart with such a happy smile. That joy had quickly turned into a feeling of being miserable and crushed. Lunathia clutched her hands to her chest, like she was steeling herself for something. Nox wasn't wasting any time, said he was heading east. Urin wanted to stay for Sierra's sake, but she thanked him and turned him down. Urin suggested they all chill out together, but she wasn't having it. She straight up said it was time to make good on their deal. Even Mr. Nox himself froze up when he heard her sharp words. He was still a little unsure about exactly how her power worked. He turned around and point-blank asked if she could find Robert. The girl told him to hold out his hand. She was going to give it a shot. She tried to focus and shut her eyes tight. A million terrible scenarios flashed before her eyes, like Robert getting mauled to death by some wild animal. She pictured Sierra's gut-wrenching sobs, then the guy's funeral. Lunathia's eyes snapped open, and she recoiled like she'd been burned. Nox saw her shock and figured he'd better ask what she saw. She stammered, barely able to admit that in her vision, they didn't make it in time. The guy froze, not believing what he just heard. She mentioned a bear with a crescent-shaped scar on its forehead. It was supposed to attack Robert in a cave that looked like its den. Nox immediately pointed out that the team was exploring a different part of the woods. Yuri latched onto those words instantly, his mind already racing. The girl asked him to trust her and follow her into the cave to find Robert. Nox shot back that he could end up 6 feet under if she was wrong. Lunathia locked eyes with him when he told her he believed her. He ordered a squad of soldiers to head east, to where Robert was. He, on the other hand, was going to go straight into the bear's den the lady mentioned. Lunathia immediately protested, saying it was too dangerous to go alone. In response, the man just stroked her cheek and told her not to worry. He confidently promised that, thanks to her power, they'd both make it back alive. His kind words managed to reassure the worried girl. After that, Nox jumped back and ordered Urine to move out. Urine followed him, saying he didn't need to act so tough. Lunatia crossed her arms, begging them to come back in one piece. She didn't know how the operation would go, but she was hoping for the best. The girl didn't even realize how she'd sat there until evening. She vaguely remembered dozing off while waiting for the marquise. The girl jolted awake, realizing it was already night. The next moment, she bumped into Urine, who greeted her with a smile. Lunatia immediately bombarded him with questions about the man's whereabouts. He just smiled cheerfully and suggested she take a look at them. The woman found the two lovers, reunited after being apart. Luna was over the moon, so happy that everything was okay with them. Turns out, during the mouse attack, Robert lost his footing and fell off a cliff. He decided to wait out the night in a cave, which happened to be a bear's den. Urine added that it was thanks to her they managed to save Robert. They both went silent when they heard Master Nox's voice. He saw the girl's smile and said a bear wouldn't stand a chance against him. The man bowed his head and sincerely thanked her for her help. The woman told him to raise his head and said she was just doing her duty. He replied that she chose to help them of her own free will. Nox thanked her again, saying they wouldn't have made it without her. His gratitude felt so unusual, it actually surprised her. Before, her gift was treated like an obligation, taken completely for granted. Urine chimed in, saying they briefly mentioned her help to the couple. They immediately rushed over to thank her for her assistance. Lunathia felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her from all the thankfulness. She suddenly remembered there was something she wanted to ask Nox. Luna asked what he was looking for at a place called Glade. The second she said it, she felt a sharp turn for the worse. She couldn't figure out why her vision suddenly went dark. The girl gave him a scare when she suddenly passed out. Looks like taking a break from using her powers for so long finally caught up with her. She was like totally out, dreaming she was a little kid again. The little girl was crying, all alone in the corner of an empty room. Then, out of nowhere, she saw this old woman who looked just like her. She started trying to calm the crying girl down, rubbing her back. The little girl finally choked out that her dad had given her a real dressing down. She was trying to soothe Rosalind and Soleil, who were bickering over nothing, but her sister just straight up shoved her away, real rough. She bumped into Cynthia by accident, and then Cynthia just burst into tears. The woman insisted she hadn't done anything wrong and would give her father a piece of her mind. The little girl asked her grandma why her dad was always so mad at her. She figured it was because she looked different from everyone else. The girl thought everyone would love her if she was just like her grandma. The woman hugged her tight and said she didn't want to use this gift anymore. She confessed it was a curse, and she'd make damn sure to find people who loved her for who she was. Finally, she said she loved her very much, even without this gift. Grandma was the only one who genuinely loved Lunathia. After she passed away from illness, her gift passed to Luna, and she completely forgot her words. Only later did she realize her grandma had been absolutely right. After a while, she finally managed to open her eyes. Sierra was standing right in front of her, looking worried. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She had no idea how long she'd been out. The maid told her it had been a full 3 hours. She also mentioned that Lunathia had collapsed into Lord Nox's arms. Right after that, he rushed her to the lounge to rest. The maid happily added that he carried her like a princess. After hearing that, Luna felt her face burn with embarrassment. Sierra suddenly decided to express her gratitude for the help. She bowed deeply, feeling like words couldn't express how thankful she was. Lunathia tried to brush it off, saying it was no big deal. The maidservant eagerly chimed in, promising they'd do anything to repay her kindness. She mentioned that Master Nox was already waiting for her for dinner. Sierra happily gestured towards the table, inviting her to come over. Lunathia, lost in thought, quickly followed her lead and sat down. After a while, she made her way over to Nox, who seemed deep in thought. She tried to explain that she was just exhausted from the day and totally crashed. Lunathia apologized for making him wait. The man replied that it was fine and told her to take a seat at the table. No sooner had she sat down across from him than trays of food were brought out. The girl found an amazing dish set right in front of her. She hurried to take a bite, feeling her stomach twist with hunger. I think even she was surprised by how delicious it was. Nox calmly remarked that she had quite the appetite. The girl wanted to savor the taste as much as possible before it was gone. Even the boss himself noticed how much she was enjoying the food. She immediately remembered her subordinate, who happily ate whatever they were given. Sadly, he was wounded by poisoned arrows in the war. Before he died, all he asked was to be released from his suffering. Lunathia understood what he was implying. and asked if his request was granted. Nox agreed, saying he'd fight for any life that could be saved. Then, he suddenly remembered her saying to get rid of her if she became a burden. The guy asked if she was still sure about that, after hearing his story. Miss Hassel paused for a second, then said she was. She smiled, adding that she knew exactly what was happening and wasn't scared. She surprised him by saying he turned out to be a good guy. He quietly admitted that he'd overstepped some boundaries with her. Lunathia didn't catch what he said and asked him to repeat it. The guy just got flustered and told her to forget about it. She was surprised when he announced that he owed her an apology. He remembered that night, carrying Lunathia back to her bedroom. Turns out, he'd spotted an open book on her desk and glanced at it. She immediately got flustered, trying to figure out what he'd managed to read. He apologized, saying he'd only seen the page that was open. Knox also said it was cute that she kept a personal journal. He looked at her and couldn't help but think of her as a little puppy. The guy recalled her writing about wanting to see the scenery, so he decided to take her somewhere. He smirked, all confident, and promised to show her an awesome view. After a while, he led her out to a clearing in the woods. She started to say they wouldn't be able to see anything in the dark like this. He said you can't see the stars or moon in this forest, but there's something he wants to show her. The next second, the girl noticed a brightly glowing abdomen. Lunaria realized with amazement that the whole forest was covered in them. She was blown away by the beauty, something she never even knew existed. The man said they're called moonfire glowbugs, and they only come out at night. He gently touched the girl's back and asked what she thought. Looks like he nailed the surprise. Lunaria was totally stoked. Her smile shone so bright, it couldn't help but make the Marquise happy too. These glowbugs are closely tied to the moonlit glade she was asking about. It's famous because the grass that grows there has special properties. Legends said this herb could work miracles, and that magical stones were hidden in the forest. Luna immediately remembered reading a similar legend before. The moment arrived when Nox decided to reveal his true reason. He confessed he was searching for this field under orders from the imperial heir. Luna felt a jolt, realizing he was talking about the future emperor. In an instant, she understood that Nox was entrusted with a vital mission. He added that this stone could be presented as a gift to the empress. Nox also clarified that his friend personally asked him to do this. Over time, they found a couple of stone tablets with ancient codes on them. They hoped to find the place after deciphering them, but they came up empty. Luna couldn't help but wonder if she could help his mission succeed. The guy noticed the weather changing and suggested they head back to the castle. The second she called him master, he froze, just like that. He said he wanted to ask her to call him something totally different. Nox looked her in the eye and reminded her she'd be his wife soon. I guess Luna realized how weird the formal address was herself. He was okay with it when she suggested calling him Master Nox. The guy gave her a long look and said he'd just call her by her name too. Luna suddenly realized that she felt warm and at peace around him. The guy chivalrously offered his arm and asked if he could escort her. He said it was because she was blind and would have trouble getting around. The girl quickly agreed and held out her hand to him. Time flew by relentlessly, and a whole month had passed since that day. Lunatia's father faced new hardships, one after another. He got hustled by the merchant he bought the orchard from. A single loophole in the contract cost them the whole damn property. He realized again that none of this would have happened if Lunatia had been there. Her mother sadly mentioned how she'd been hoping Lunacia would come back. Solea's grades have taken a serious nosedive since she left. Even little Cynthia stopped showing up at social gatherings. Unlike the others, Rosalind was crushing it on her own, making serious moves in the business world. Nicholas blew a gasket, yelling about how they'd cut all ties with the Alaudi family. He kept ranting and raving, blaming Luna, the one who ran off, for all their troubles. Rosalind quietly eavesdropped on their conversation, hidden behind the door. She was about to bail, but her assistant showed up with the sales figures for the month. He seemed to be bracing her for bad news, and gave a respectful bow. The results were so lousy, her face just fell. She crumpled the paper in her fist, furious, and knew things had to change, big time. Turns out, she'd been feeding her parents a line about how well the business was doing. Meanwhile, their main breadwinner was chilling in a castle, without a care in the world. It's been a whole month since she finally got her freedom. On one of those days, the girl rushed to talk to Nox. Lunathia bolted right to him and called out the signal they agreed on. She offered to read his future before the expedition. To her surprise, Nox refused, saying they were taking a safe route. He also reminded her that, thanks to her, they dodged that nasty wolf. Still, Lunathia remembered their agreement. Before she could finish, he gently stroked her cheek. He looked her dead in the eyes, totally serious, and said again he wasn't going to stick to it. Besides, he reminded her how she slept for 3 days straight after using her power. Lunathia knew he was right, but she still started to argue. His assistant jumped in, saying his little wife was just trying to help out. He added with a smile that Knox's sweet wife had even baked them cookies. One of the soldiers said Robert was jealous because of how close she'd gotten with Sierra. Knox watched thoughtfully as his people praised Lunathia. He couldn't help but remember the girl's wishes she'd written in her diary. Luna shyly admitted that she had wanted to bake cookies for others. Knox calmly pointed out that all his subordinates were crazy about her. He added that he really liked the girl's cookies too. Lunathia beamed and sincerely thanked him for the compliment. Meanwhile, all the subordinates were happily watching their boss. The second he glanced at them, they'd immediately pretend to be talking about something else. Yurin turned to the girl and said they were just going to scout the area for useful resources. These orders came straight from the Crown Prince himself. Lunathia immediately guessed that he was tight with Knox. The next moment, the Marquis hopped on his horse and announced it was time to head out. The girl readily put her hand to her chest and said she'd be waiting for them. Lunathia shouted after him, asking him to be careful out there. During his absence, the girl kept herself busy with various tasks. She was grateful for all the amazing people around her. Sierra said with a smile that they finally got the furnace going. Lunathia decided to bake some cookies and asked for a baking sheet. She realized, deep down, that she really wanted to help all these people. She tried to see what Knox's future would look like in a year, but it was super hazy. After that, she slept for like 3 days straight, even though she didn't get the result she wanted. Her right eye went completely blind, and she couldn't see far into the future anymore. She didn't know how soon Knox would realize she couldn't sense things. Luckily, Lunathia could still see the immediate future. She turned around and saw Sierra frozen over a bowl of berries. Robert brought them back after the expedition, but they turned out to be super sour. Lunathia flashed a bright smile, seeing the disgruntled girl's funny face. Sierra tried to talk her out of trying it, but she was curious to test her feelings. Meanwhile, Crown Prince Jindal was reading a letter that had been sent. He turned around and heard a messenger bird fly in through his window. The man chuckled, guessing it was a message from the Moon Eater himself. He was happy, even though he suspected Yurin had actually written the letter. It said the search was going according to plan, and he'd send a report soon. The next second, he was floored to learn he was getting a bride. Yurin also mentioned that the cold-blooded Knox was happy with her. The prince was thrilled to hear such joyful news from his friend. Knox never let any woman get even remotely close to him before. The air made it crystal clear he had to meet this amazing lady in person. Meanwhile, Knox's report said Lunathia wasn't feeling so hot. Sierra was worried, noticing some serious changes in her friend. She said Lunathia started acting weird ever since they baked that cake. She even completely stopped drinking her favorite tea and eating sweets. Yurin chimed in, saying the staff haven't been getting any goodies from her either. He noticed it from the sad faces on all his soldiers. Knox kept thinking and realized she's been barely touching her dinner lately. All these things pointed to one thing. She's lost her appetite. Sierra didn't know all the details and just figured Luna was feeling under the weather. Knox realized it had been way too long since he'd spent quality time with his girl. He decided it was time to ditch the paperwork and figure this thing out himself. The guy stood up and announced he wanted to see her face to face. He finished by saying it was his duty to be there for his wife during tough times. Yurin immediately decided that the notorious Night Knight was back in action. The guy ordered him to shut his trap, saying he was young and dumb back then. Looks like his threat worked on Yurin, and he decided to zip it. He whispered to Sierra that back in the day, Knox was quite the player. The assistant smiled, saying he was happy to see how happy Knox was getting. Looks like his words didn't piss her off. They actually got her thinking. He remembered how stoked Luna got when she saw those fireflies. He figured he could make her happy if he just knew what she wanted. Sierra smiled and suggested that Luna needed a change of scenery with him. She was hinting that they should hit the city and spend some quality time alone. They were interrupted by a maid, announcing the arrival of an important guest. Before she could finish, the Crown Prince suddenly appeared behind her. Knox squinted, like he had a splitting headache, and asked why he came today of all days. The prince said he missed him after getting some interesting news. Yurin immediately rushed to explain why he sent the prince a letter. Knox tried to point out he didn't ask for this, but Yurin saw things differently. The prince winked and just came right out with it. He was there to see the young lady. The Marquis wasted no time telling Lunathia the news, and she was definitely surprised. The guy added that the Crown Prince was already waiting for her in the drawing room. Prince Gendal von Lesenras was an only child. He was pretty independent, smart, and a real people person. Lunathia was floored that someone like him would want to meet her. Nox said he could kick the prince out if she wasn't interested. All she asked was for a little time to get herself ready. She added that she didn't want to embarrass Nox or be impolite. Nox wanted to argue, but decided against stopping her. The guy was about to say something, but suddenly clammed up and froze. He decided to leave the room and told her to let him know if she got tired of the prince. Nox joked that he'd just toss him out to the wolves in the woods. That light bit of sarcasm made the girl smile, and she couldn't help it. After a while, she finally decided to go meet the prince. She bowed politely and greeted him, stunning him with her beauty. To her surprise, the young man held out his hand and told her to ditch all the formalities. He smiled warmly and said he never liked them anyway. After that, he asked her to sit next to him so they could chat. Lunathia scrambled to sit up, realizing the rumors about him were dead on. The prince slyly asked how she managed to snag someone like Nox. They both knew damn well Nox wouldn't marry just anyone. Even so, Lunathia couldn't spill all the details of their arrangement. Before their meeting, the prince had dug into the Hassel family's history. From some old records, he'd learned her family supposedly had the gift of foresight. The crown prince recounted the legend of her family's gift in perfect detail. Lunathia felt a jolt of panic, realizing their secret was out in the open. Finally, she confidently declared it was just a tall tale made up by their ancestors. Legends weren't really holding the prince back, especially since he was searching for the moonlit clearing. He decided to play along, telling her he wasn't surprised she was getting hitched. Her family had been hiding their gift from the royals to avoid messing with the empire's destiny. Out of the blue, the prince said he'd even offer for her to dump Nox and marry him instead. Lunathia was so stunned by that bombshell, she froze solid. Urin immediately lost it, yelling that he couldn't do that. The prince smirked, asking if Urin was eavesdropping. Urin called the prince out for trying to steal his master Nox's happiness. Little did he know, the Marquis himself was hearing every word he said. He blew his cover when they asked him to back them up. Lunathia was practically vibrating with anticipation, wondering how Nox would react to all this. The guy stepped forward and announced he'd chosen Lunathia to be his future wife. That's exactly why he thought backing out now would be a total screw-up. The girl immediately shot back, saying she hadn't even considered anything like that. Everyone only ever saw her powers before. But around him, she finally felt happy. The prince finally found what he was looking for, and admitted he hadn't believed Urin's letter at first. He claimed his old buddy was, for the first time ever, completely smitten with a woman. Nox told him to shut his trap, reminding him he already had a chosen one. His father had even approved this girl as the future empress. Still, Gendal saw it as just a political marriage and wanted to play the field, if you catch my drift. That line let Lunathia know exactly what kind of interesting sense of humor the prince had. If it wasn't for this, she'd think they were onto her and were gonna snatch her up for her powers. Finally, the guy raises his hand and announces he's got something to deliver. Nox was thrown for a loop when he saw some kind of letter in the dude's hand. Turns out, he came all this way just to deliver a letter from the emperor himself. In it, the emperor was going on and on about how stoked he was about Nox's marriage. He even wanted them to get hitched right there in the palace and offered to foot the bill. Before he could even blink, Nox snatched the letter right out of the guy's hand. He remembered he'd been granted the privilege of not having to obey the emperor's orders. Gendal just smirked again and said, "You don't just turn something like that down." He added that if they didn't get married, the Hassel family would keep acting like total jerks. Lunathia jumped up instantly, asking what the hell they had to do with it. The prince called out from afar, saying they still hadn't gotten over her leaving. High society still can't believe Nox got hitched, but the Viscount's playing that angle. He's been blabbing all over town that their house is under the protection of the Iltern family. Lunathia couldn't even believe he'd have the nerve to pull something like that. Nox was just as surprised, but he played it cool and asked him to repeat that. He's been spreading it around that he married off his daughter to squeeze some cash out of her family. Looks like the Viscount decided to seize the opportunity and put their family in the spotlight. He figures the Marquis is so shut off from the world, he won't hear about these rumors. Lunathia felt a wave of shame that these people were still trying to weasel their way to the top. She couldn't believe they were calling her their darling daughter in public. Nox noticed her sadness and said he'd personally take care of them. The girl felt ashamed that she was causing Nox so much trouble. The prince added that the bride's family was obligated to attend the wedding. They needed to show that Luna had completely cut ties with her family. Yurin liked that idea and agreed they deserved to be taught a lesson. Jendal said he was really looking forward to seeing Nox and Lunatia's ex throw down. After he said that, Luna realized the prince had studied everything about her. He asked what choice they'd make in a way that sounded like he was dragging them into something wild. Nox and Lunatia exchanged a tense look, like they were weighing their options. Finally, the guy said they should agree, but he's willing to consider Luna's wishes. Luna didn't really want to see her family, but she was still down with it. She declared, all fired up, that she was ready to face them head-on. Her answer satisfied Jendal, after which he said the ceremony would be awesome. He said he'd work out all the details with her dad and let them know a specific date. He gently kissed her hand and asked her to take care of his dumbass friend. The prince pissed Nox off, and Nox reminded him he was about to bail out of here. Jendal called him a grump in return and said goodbye before leaving. Nox wearily touched his forehead, like he'd just inherited another headache. Luna's head immediately flooded with thoughts about the upcoming meeting. Nox knew this decision was tough for her, and he respected that. Meanwhile, Cynthia was thinking about how much she loved her family. She was stoked that mom and dad always spoiled her rotten. Even her sister Rosalind and brother Soli were always good to her. She loved Lunathia even more, since she always got her what she wanted. Right now, she was watching her dad's jaw drop when he heard about his daughter marrying Iltern. Nicholas had been pissed ever since Lunathia left home. The girl missed her sister, because life got way harder without her gift. Besides that, she really missed that impressive marquise. Nicholas knew their showing up would signal that Lunathia was no longer part of the family. That meant they couldn't hide behind the marquis's name anymore. The wife tried to scold her husband, but he snapped at her to shut her trap. Nicholas figured he could schmooze some high-roller aristocrats. Looks like Cynthia just found out about her sister's upcoming engagement. She decided she'd see him at the party and totally win him over. The kid was convinced he was marrying Lunatia for her special abilities. Stoked by her own brilliant idea, she barged into her parents' study. She flashed him a smile and begged to go to her sister's engagement party. Meanwhile, Marquise Iltern was just starting to talk about the preparations. Yurin said they should probably start by finding a dress for the bride-to-be. He was adamant that Lunathia should absolutely shine on their wedding day. The assistant winked at Nox and suggested they hit the town for some shopping. The girl froze when Nox declared he was ready to go to the store. He decided to press the issue, saying he only wanted to go with her, just the two of them. Lunathia immediately remembered how much he hated being in public. Nox shot back that he didn't care about that, and she shouldn't worry about it. Yurin smirked and said he needed to work on his game when asking a lady out. Nox swallowed his annoyance and calmly stood up. He walked over to her and said he'd really like to take a walk with her. He asked her so directly, it even made her blush. He saw she was flustered and asked again if she'd keep him company. Lunathia quickly agreed, then started worrying about what she should wear. Eventually, they made it out to the city, and she was blown away by how beautiful it was. She thought it'd be bustling, but it was way quieter than she expected. Nox mentioned that his brother was currently running things in this city, so Lunathia accidentally found out that he has a brother. Lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice his hand reaching out. She was surprised when he offered his arm before they went inside. Nox explained it was because her eyesight wasn't great, and she might get lost in the crowd. She knew it was just him being considerate, but it still made her super awkward. She reached out and took his hand, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. And that's how they walked, hand in hand, all the way to the store. A couple of minutes later, the shopkeeper called out to them, calling them a sweet couple. The guy grinned and asked if they wanted some fresh apples. He started going on about how delicious and sweet they were this season. The shopkeeper held out an apple to Lunaria and told her to give it a try. She was so flustered, she almost forgot she'd lost some of her sense of taste. She quickly took a bite, not wanting to raise any red flags. Lunaria didn't know what to do, so she decided to fake it with a smile. The shopkeeper saw her smile and warned her not to let Mr. Nox catch on. Nox didn't react to what he said at all, and just yanked Lunathia by the arm. He dragged the girl away so fast, the guy didn't stand a chance. The Marquise practically teleported her into an alley like he was seriously pissed. The next thing she knew, he had her pinned against the wall, scared the crap out of her. She had no idea why he was suddenly so ticked off. Nox said he hated being lied to, and he could tell when she was doing it. She tried to tell him she didn't know what he was talking about, but he told her to cut the crap. He stared right into her eyes and told her he could see right through her. Nox brought up how fake her reaction had been. He explained that he'd set it up with the shopkeeper and swapped her apple for a sour one. Luna was so shocked, She accidentally dropped her apple. She didn't know how he'd react if he found out she was losing all 5 senses. Luna was scared he might send her back to her parents' place or forbid her from using her powers. Neither of those options worked for her. They could take everything away. No one had ever cared about her as much as he did. The guy sighed, like he was worn out, and said he suspected she had secrets. He asked her to be honest. Why did she want him to, take care of her down the line? Looks like that question caught her completely off guard, and she clammed up. The Marquise was determined to get an answer, but his younger brother called him over. A smiling kid named Suk immediately locked eyes with him. He yanked down his hood and said he was just doing an inspection. Lunatia was thrown off, because he looked nothing like Nox. The second he laid eyes on her, she figured she should introduce herself. She gave a respectful bow and said her name was Lunatia Hassel. She started to apologize for them meeting in a place like this, but he cut her off. He bowed right back and said he was super happy to meet her. Unlike Nox, this guy's gentle smile was a total knockout. He reminded her of that squirrel she caught in the Sole forest once. Suk was stoked his hard-ass older brother had finally found himself a bride. He grinned and told her how much he'd been looking forward to seeing her. Luna barely had a chance to reciprocate before Nox was already telling her to move, like he didn't even want to talk. He rushed off, telling Suk not to hang around in the alley. The kid hung his head and said Nox hasn't been home at all lately. He called His Majesty's order about the plant on the moonlit field total BS. Lunathia also thought it was pointless to do all this just for a gift for the empress. She used to think this whole quest was something the empress herself wanted. Suk asked if there wasn't some other reason behind all this. Nox calmly replied that even if there was, it wasn't his problem. The young man protested, saying he wanted everything that was rightfully his back. He sadly admitted that he wasn't cut out to lead anyone. Nox was surprised and said he'd been thinking about handing over the family head position to him. Suk started to correct him, but Nox cut him off, saying that's what their mother wanted. Before he could even finish the sentence, his condition took a nosedive. Lunathia immediately put her arm around him, clearly worried about his health. Nox coldly told him to get some fresh air. That's all he needed. After that, they carefully walked him out to the main street. Lunathia froze when she spotted her older sister in the distance. At first, she tried to figure out why, but then decided she must have been seeing things. Suk coughed, and she immediately told him to take a slow, deep breath. Nox asked where his bodyguards were, and that firecracker of a fiancé he was with in the city. Before Suk could even answer, they immediately heard an indignant girl's voice. The calm young man's fiancée crossed her arms and glared at them. She started chewing out Lord Suk for ditching her so abruptly. She spoke to Lunathia with disdain, ordering her to get her hands off her fiancé. Suk demanded that Ruby not speak to his brother's bride-to-be in that tone. She hurried the guy away when he said he was being taken care of. The girl promised to give him medicine when they got back to the carriage. She sneered at Nox, wishing him endless days wandering in search of moongrass. She added that her and Suk's future child would be the heir to the Iltern house. Looks like Nox was already familiar with the girl's nasty temper, so he didn't react at all. Once they were alone, the guy explained she was the one and only daughter of Marquise Fond. Luna immediately started racking her brain, trying to place that super familiar name. Finally, it clicked. She remembered his wife being a major player in high society. Luna's mom had desperately tried to cozy up to her, but it was all for nothing. Nox decided to get a move on, since they were burning daylight. She squeezed his hand, realizing she'd actually managed to keep her secret under wraps. She quickly corrected herself, since Nox was the one who made it possible. Now it felt wrong, keeping such a huge detail from him. She made up her mind right then and there. She'd spill all her secrets to him, just not yet. Eventually, they ended up wandering into a fancy-ass jewelry store. The sales guy greeted them with a smile and started pitching the merchandise. Nox just cut to the chase and asked him to pick out a few jewelry sets. Lunathia tried to talk him out of buying all the stuff he was getting for her. Out of nowhere, the dude confessed he just flat-out loved dressing her up. That hit her so out of left field, her face went beet red in a heartbeat. Just then, the consultant rolled up with some top-shelf, A-grade bling. Lunathia immediately got all excited, checking out every single piece. Suddenly, she flashed back to seeing her older sister that one time. Luna still couldn't figure out if it was really her or just someone who looked like her. Meanwhile, back at Rosalind's store, a real mess was about to go down. After hours of studying the competition, she threw open the door, totally bummed. Her lackey instantly freaked and started sucking up to her. Rosalind snapped at him to shut his trap, then said their shop was crawling with customers. She shoved a report at him, demanding he explain the massive drop in sales. The guy bowed super low and said he was just following her orders. He was so scared, his body involuntarily started shaking and going limp. Rosalind was absolutely livid that she couldn't use Lunacia anymore. She turned away and told the guy he was canned. He begged her to reconsider, but she was lost in thought. She grimly opened her office door and saw a mountain of paperwork. She absently grabbed the first piece of paper she could find from the table. It had a drawing of that same phantom plant on it. She was certain that once she found those gem fruits, her sales would skyrocket. The girl smirked, deciding that this herb was going to be hers. Meanwhile, Castle Ilterna was shaking with joyful shouts. Sierra was thrilled with all the shopping they'd managed to do. The maid was over the moon, seeing the beautiful Lunathia. Every outfit was so dazzling. They were struggling to pick one for the banquet. Sierra was so worked up, you'd think her life depended on this choice. The girl smiled and suggested they take a break before the next fitting. Lunathia didn't even get a chance to argue before the other girl bolted off to make tea. Lunathia figured she should take off her dress so she wouldn't accidentally get it dirty. The girl froze in the middle of the room, lost in thought, surrounded by all these fancy gifts. In the Hassel family, she was the only one who barely ever got anything new. That's exactly why the strict Marquis's words hit her so hard. Even though the line sounded kinda corny, it still made her smile. As soon as she heard that telltale sound, she whipped around. She thought it was Sierra, but she accidentally bumped into the Marquis himself. I think she was so stunned, she totally forgot what she was wearing. The girl instantly tried to cover herself up from her future husband's gaze. Knox was supposed to be used to seeing women, but he still got flustered. He announced he'd turn away, then asked if he should just leave. Then he noticed a birthmark on her chest, shaped like a clock. Hearing the story behind it, he thought about how rough she'd had it. She agreed, saying she was just an add-on to her heir brother at first. From then on, she was treated like dirt until she got strong. After that, they started paying attention, which she had to admit felt good. She smiled bitterly, adding that they only saw her as a useful tool. Knox thoughtfully considered her words, saying the comparison was spot on. He looked into her eyes and patted the couch next to him. Lunathia was still feeling awkward, but she sat down next to him anyway. After a short silence, Knox mentioned his mother treated him the same way. His sudden confession caught Luna so off guard. Her jaw just dropped. She wanted to hear more, but Sierra barged into the room. Her face went red with embarrassment when she saw the two of them sitting together. She immediately tried to shoo Mr. Knox away, saying he shouldn't be in here. Knox tried to explain, but she was convinced otherwise. Finally, she just shoved him out of the room, yelling about protecting the lady's honor. And just like that, the master of the estate was banished by his own servant. The guy let out a tired sigh, realizing he almost spilled the beans. This urge to share made him realize he'd grown attached to Lunathia. Lunathia's initial request for death still haunted him. Finally, another day passed, and the long-awaited ceremony arrived. The gorgeously dressed newlyweds proudly strolled through the emperor's palace. Everyone present watched the bride and groom with rapt attention. Many were seeing Lunathia Hassel for the first time and were taken aback. Only the crown prince smiled contentedly as he looked at the couple. The gathered nobles eagerly gossiped about the guy who'd been living like a hermit. They also didn't hold back discussing Luna, whose father had been so loud about their love. Hearing this chatter, Lunathia started scanning the crowd for her family. Knox picked up on what she was thinking and suggested they head over to Jendal. He was running the show tonight, seeing as the emperor never showed. Lunathia processed the new info and agreed. She started to move forward, but stopped dead when she heard a familiar voice. She narrowed her eyes with disgust when she saw that annoying face. Standing before her was Rondell, her humiliated ex-fiancé. Meanwhile, Soleil and Cynthia were waiting for their sister. Cynthia was thinking about Marquis Iltern and called out to her brother. She spread her arms and asked if she looked cute today. Soleil was taken aback by her question, which she'd been asking all morning. Cynthia was screaming about how this night had to be perfect. On top of that, their mom and Rosalind were no-shows, and Dad was bowing to everyone. Soleil was stuck dealing with his heavy babysitting duties. He thought, like everyone else, that their family lived in paradise before Luna left. Meanwhile, Rondell kept staring daggers at the new couple. Lunathia never expected to run into him before her own family. Rondell decided to speak up, mentioning how the bride had become even more beautiful. He said he'd let bygones be bygones about the whole scene she caused, and suggested she reconsider. Lunathia felt the anger rising and asked him to repeat himself. She cut him down with her icy tone, asking him just what he meant by that. Rondell turned beet red. declaring she was still totally in love with him. The guy moved in on her, like he was trying to put the screws on. He whispered in her ear that he could spill the beans on her little secret. She looked over at Knox, so glad she dodged a bullet by not marrying Rondell. Much to the deadbeat ex-fiancé's surprise, she just gave him a sweet smile. He lit up instantly, thinking she finally saw the light. She just greeted him politely, like they were total strangers. Her professional tone yanked him right back down to earth. She added, sounding worn out, that their engagement was off, and she wanted nothing more to do with him. Rondell pointed a finger at her, shocked, and said she was the one who wanted it that way. Before he could pounce on her again, a rock-solid hand clamped down on his shoulder. He growled at the loser, asking if he seriously thought he could threaten his wife. Knox warned him that if he screwed up again, he'd burn his whole life to the ground. He also added that nobody would believe his sob story about the Hassel house's gift. Knox brought up that Rondell was about to get kicked out of the second division for messing up. Rondell got even more freaked out when he realized Knox knew even that. The guy just stated that from now on, until the end of his days, he'd only know failure. He stared him down, telling him to never go near his wife again. After that, he went back to Lunathia and said he'd just wasted his time. The man gently stroked the girl's hand, like she was the most precious thing in the world. She gave him a sweet smile and said he was absolutely right. They'd almost forgotten about that pain-in-the-butt Rondell until they saw him behind them. The girl sized him up with a scornful look, like he was a total nobody. He started ranting that this was all wrong, and Luna was supposed to be his bride. Rondell yelled out in frustration that his future would have been perfect then. He bit his lip, looking pissed, and pointed his finger right at the Marcus. He couldn't hold back anymore and challenged Knox to a duel. It sounded so cocky that Knox felt disgusted. Lunathia, surprised, asked him what he was even babbling about. Rondell cited the imperial laws that allowed for a duel to take place. Lunathia yelled that Knox didn't have to agree to such a stupid thing. Even so, the guy was still ready to end this once and for all. After a short silence, Knox brought up his words about a fair fight. He asked if he was really resorting to such desperate measures now that he was cornered. He laughed, adding that he'd give him credit for his guts and accept the challenge. Lunathia tried to stop him from doing something so pointless, but he told her to step back. The crown prince jumped into the chaos and gave a round of applause. Looks like he was the one who was hoping for something like this to happen the most. He gave everyone a cheerful smile and said he'd overheard their conversation. Lunathia immediately glanced at Prince Jendel with concern. Jendel said all the juicy stuff was happening around his buddy and his bride-to-be. Looks like he wanted to turn this whole thing into a real spectacle. He smirked and said it was way more interesting than some boring old dance. Rondell figured he could get some justice and asked for permission to duel. He added that if he won, he wanted to be Lunathia's fiancé again. The prince waved his hand and said he was down with the fight. Lunathia was shocked how quickly he agreed to it. Jendel looked at his friend, waiting for his terms of engagement. Knox calmly said his opponent better not even think about getting close to Lunathia again. The prince accepted their stakes and got everyone's attention. He was ready to dramatically present the upcoming fight to everyone. Jendel pointed at Lunathia, blaming her for everything that was happening. He added that because of her, these two guys were about to throw down. The prince dramatically threw open his arms, calling it a scene straight out of an opera. He introduced the contenders, one of whom was a knight and her ex-fiancé. On the other side of the arena was a man known as the Holy Sword. He declared that not everyone gets to witness something this epic. Everyone present was hyped for the show about to go down. That's exactly why Prince Gendal turned this duel into a spectacle. Lunathia had never seen Knox fight with swords before. She started to sweat it. Since fencing was Rondell's bread and butter, she knew her ex-fiancé's true colors, the rotten bastard. Looks like Knox caught on that his own bride-to-be was worried about him. He smirked and said he wouldn't lose to that empty-headed punk. Knox added that it was all a sham anyway, and Jendal would handle it. His words gave Lunathia confidence, and she said she'd believe in him and watch. After that, Knox spaced out, like he suddenly remembered something. He suddenly wanted her to spill all her secrets if he won. Lunathia was taken aback, because she couldn't bring herself to do that. In the end, she steeled herself and agreed to his offer. The guy just gave her a calm look and made her promise him something. Knox smiled warmly and said he had way more motivation now. After a while, the preparations for the duel were finally complete. Everyone there froze, waiting for the fight to begin under the moonlight. He ordered them to hand over the weapons to the duelists when two identical swords were brought out. Knox immediately calmly grabbed a regular, unremarkable blade. Unlike him, Rondell looked way more stressed out. The prince said whoever knelt first would lose. Lunatia instantly glanced at her opponent, who looked seriously determined. Rondell told himself that Nox's skills were a thing of the past. He was already running the numbers on how badly he was about to get wrecked. He knew the division took him in because of his skills, even if he did have a gift. Rondell squeezed his eyes shut, trying to believe he was strong and unbeatable. He figured everything would go back to normal once he won this thing. The prince announced the start of the match, and their eyes locked. Rondell let out a war cry and charged straight at his opponent. He tried to take him down with a blow, but Nox masterfully blocked it. Everyone was stoked to see the Earl Alaudie's son taking charge. The nobles were convinced of his insane fencing talent. Rondell's arrogance even had Lunathia a little worried. Gendel said Nox was just showing off for his girl, like always. The prince said it'd be a total snooze fest if Nox just flattened this dude right away. Nox was just putting on a show for everyone, flexing his muscles. Hearing that, Lunathia realized he wasn't even going all out. The prince smirked and said even he could take Rondell down. Nox could have dropped him with one punch, but he wanted to teach him a lesson. The prince slyly said even his legendary patience has its limits. After that, Nox landed one blow that completely shut his opponent down. In a split second, Rondell was eating dirt, looking like a total chump. Even the greedy nobles couldn't follow how fast Rondell went down. Rondell started stuttering, saying it was impossible. Nox just coldly replied that his defeat was obvious from the jump. He claimed he couldn't lose to some kid who'd never even seen a battlefield. Nox sneered, saying he should have been training instead of chasing after Lunatia. Those words were the final nail in the coffin for Rondell's honor. He also demanded he not forget his promise to stay away from Lunatia. Rondell didn't dare say a word and shamefully turned his head away. After that, the prince proudly introduced the new victor to everyone. All the ladies immediately swarmed Nox, eager to shower him with praise. Lunatia was shocked to see even her sister Cynthia running after him. She started going on about how amazing he was and how totally thrilled she felt. The girl rushed to say her name and that they'd actually met before. She was trying to confess her feelings, but Nox just silently walked over to Lunathia. Turns out, the Marquise only cared about getting praise from one girl. Lunathia gave a warm smile and genuinely congratulated him on his victory. She also pointed out that Cynthia wanted to have a word with him. The Marquise just gave a cold reply, saying he wasn't interested in loud women. Lunathia was surprised, since Cynthia usually had every guy wrapped around her finger. Only Mr. Nox was able to resist her charms. The guy snapped her back to reality and reminded her about the terms of their deal. The girl put her hand firmly on her chest and said she'd tell him everything. Meanwhile, the knights kept guarding the noisy palace. They couldn't figure out what all the commotion and noise was about. Orders were given to beef up security at the palace, but nobody showed. The guards didn't know that a dangerous criminal was behind it all. He wanted to take down that monster who destroyed his country and his father. The unknown man smirked wickedly, wanting to get his revenge personally. Meanwhile, Lunathia wanted to leave so she could be alone with him. Nox suggested they talk about it when they got back and asked if she'd run off. The girl smiled and said that he'd become home to her too. She immediately started wondering which other family members had shown up to the reception. The crown prince walked over to them and complimented the show they put on. He added that he wouldn't expect anything less from his best friend. The prince smiled and said Lunathia had fallen in love with him all over again, watching their duel. She met his expectant gaze and awkwardly replied that you could say that. The girl didn't know how to answer that question and got flustered. The prince decided to break the tension and asked to speak with Nox privately. He explained that he wanted to discuss the search for Moonlit Glade in more detail. Nox was annoyed that he had to discuss work at a party. He apologized, saying that Gendel wouldn't let him off the hook that easily. Lunathia smiled and said she was fine being left alone. Nox wasn't buying her don't worry act for a second. In the end, the prince dragged him away, but not before complimenting his wife. Lunathia was stoked that she could finally grab a bite. Ever since she lost her sense of taste, her appetite tanked and she had to fib about it. She told Sierra she just wanted to lose weight, which only made her freak out even more. That's why she decided to at least whip up a couple of bites. She barely made it to the table before Soleil pounced on her. He immediately started grilling her about how she was doing, and if everything was all right. The girl said yes and hoped that he was doing well too. Even though he was her twin, their personalities were worlds apart. He begged her, saying the whole family was waiting for her to come home. He asked her to tell him if that creep of a marquis was keeping her prisoner in his mansion. She tried to explain about Nox, but they cut her off real quick. Nicholas greeted her with this fake-ass joy. calling her his precious little darling. The girl instantly felt disgusted by how phony he was being. He told her not to forget about her family, who were dying for her to visit. He was trying to put on this whole show of being a caring, loving father. But all you could see in his eyes was that he wanted her to screw over her fiancé and come back. Lunathia wasn't taking orders from her family anymore, and she was about to shut this down for good. The girl iced him, saying she was done being a hassle. Nicholas was so blindsided, his face burned with rage. She went on to say she'd be an Iltern before long. She said, cold as ice, that any connection to the Hassel name was over. Nicholas's teeth ground together when she said her family wouldn't be helping the Hassels anymore. She said that after the wedding, her fiancé wouldn't be throwing them a lifeline either. Basically, she let him know they were onto his little game with the nobles. Looks like everyone around them was starting to catch on to Nicholas's BS. The guy spun around, panicked, and suddenly felt like the lowest of the low. Luna also demanded he hand over the agreement he made with Knox. The guy snapped at his daughter, saying he used the Marquis title to protect their family. He tried to accuse her of being ungrateful, but she just repeated what she said. Lunathia crushed his hopes completely, telling him they weren't family anymore. She walked off, adding that raising his voice would be considered in poor taste. Before leaving the hall, she ordered him not to disappoint her again. Afterwards, she ended up on the balcony, where she felt the full weight of her exhaustion. She knew she couldn't just up and leave the imperial palace. Lunathia decided to head back inside when she overheard someone talking. She spun around quickly and saw Knox's younger brother standing there. He asked to keep her company, claiming he was feeling lightheaded. Lunathia couldn't refuse, knowing how fragile his health was. It surprised her that he showed up to the party alone, without his fiancée. She remembered even seeing her mother, Countess Fonda. Lord Sook explained that she just wasn't that fond of Knox. Lunathia smiled knowingly, understanding the girl's fiery spirit. Sook grinned and said he'd managed to convince her, and she promised to come. He recalled how she'd grumbled about coming after work. The young man chuckled, calling her a handful, then decided to come clean. He genuinely supported her relationship with his older brother and had her back. He said he was happy that Knox had finally found someone who could accept him for who he was. Sook added that his brother had been through hell and wished he could find happiness again. He saw the girl's confusion and said he'd tell her something in secret. The guy was about to spill a long-held secret of the Iltern house. Turns out, Sook and Knox had different mothers. Knox's mother was actually his mother's sister. Their father was officially engaged to her, but he was secretly in love with Knox's mom. That's how their affair led to Knox being born. After Knox was born, their father lost interest in his fiancée. When Sook's mother found out about all this, she went ballistic. She couldn't stand the idea of her sister having a kid with her husband. The woman's prayers were answered. Her sister died in childbirth. Knox always said they were full siblings, but his stepmother couldn't stand him. Before long, everyone forgot the eldest son even existed. Sook confessed that his mother was the one pushing for him to take over as head of Iltern. By the rules, the position should have gone to the eldest, and Sook himself was born with health problems. The younger brother was cool with their father, wanting to pass the title to Knox. He still felt obligated to his mother, since everyone except his father was under her thumb. She even made a deal with him. Whoever had a kid first would get the title. Lunathia instantly remembered what Ruby said about having kids. Sook sadly added that, at his mother's command, Knox was sent off to war. He remembered how he'd excitedly run out to greet his victorious brother. But against all expectations, Knox didn't return that same joy. Sook noticed the change in his demeanor and told him he should rest. His mother suddenly appeared behind him and ordered him to stay away from him. She scornfully insulted Knox and said it was a pity he hadn't died in the war. Sook saw Lunathia's shock and said his mother had always treated him like that. That's exactly why he wanted Knox and Lunatia to have a child as soon as possible. This went against their initial agreement, making the girl feel a heavy burden of responsibility. She blushed furiously as soon as she understood what he meant. Sook didn't know they had a marriage of convenience and thought they were planning for an heir. That's usually how it goes after the wedding, but their situation was different. Lunaria knew about her bleak future and that she wouldn't be able to have kids. Sook noticed how long they were talking and told her to take care of his brother. He even saw how much Knox had changed ever since Lunaria came along. Seems like the girl herself didn't see any major differences. There was a lot she didn't know, but she wanted to stay with Knox until the very end. After she said that, Sook smiled and hurried back to the hall. Lunaria looked over the garden below and spotted Cynthia by chance. She couldn't figure out what her sister was doing alone in a place like that. The girl looked like she was trying to ambush someone. Sook caught Lunathia's surprise before he could even leave. She thanked him for the story and said all she could do was be there for him. Lord Sook smiled warmly and said that was enough. He earnestly asked her to become a real family for his brother. She couldn't really promise that, but he'd already hurried off. He barely left the balcony when a panicked Soleil ran up to her. He asked if she'd seen Cynthia and then told her how she'd thrown a fit. She burst into tears over a lost earring and made him search for it. He was told to watch her, but the second he looked away, she vanished. That's when Lunathia realized Cynthia had been watching Nox's fight. The girl was about to say where she saw her sister, but they got cut off. Standing right in front of them was Soleil's teacher, grinning like a maniac. The kid froze, totally shocked to see his old academy instructor. He explained that he served with Iltern back in the war, so he had to come. The guy gave him a nasty reminder that Soleil skipped his combat exam yesterday. He started threatening Soleil, saying he'd tell his family about his awful attendance. The teacher added that he needed to start looking up to Lord Iltern. He yanked Soleil away by the ear, saying he was going to give him a retake. Lunatia quickly bailed on the Lord, saying she was going to go look for her sister. Cynthia was a spoiled brat, but she still listened to her older sister. Sook didn't want to let the girl go alone and offered to go with her. Lunatia smiled, saying his fiancé might get ticked off. Ultimately, she still went looking for Cynthia. She wandered around the garden for ages, searching for that annoying kid. Because of her bad eyesight, Lunatia started to feel a little anxious. On top of that, she'd lost her sense of taste, which was a real drag. Because of that, she knew it would be impossible for her to become a wife and support for the Marquise. The girl lived with the distinct feeling that she'd be dead in 6 months. The next moment, she froze in terror when she saw a body lying there. It was a guard who was supposed to be protecting the palace, lying face down. The girl rushed to examine the body, quickly finding a huge bloody wound. She hadn't fully grasped how bad it was until she saw his lifeless eyes. What she saw scared her so bad, she couldn't help but scream. She checked his chest real quick and realized Cynthia might be in danger. Lunathia dropped to her knees, not even noticing another guy showing up. It was Nox's smiling little brother, who'd been searching all over for Lunathia. He explained how he found Cynthia running away after she left. She managed to find the earring, but her older brother chewed her out for it. Lunathia breathed a sigh of relief, realizing Cynthia was okay. The guy grinned again and said he decided to follow her to the garden when he heard. He calmed her down, saying Ruby would only chew him out for it. They were chatting so casually, so chill. They didn't even notice the psycho. They only spotted him when his blade was already pressed against Lunathia's throat. Meanwhile, Nox and Jendal had stepped away to discuss some serious business. He asked if Nox believed in the existence of the moonlit glade. He just replied they wouldn't know for sure until they found it. The prince chuckled and said the guy was as optimistic as ever. He stated grimly that he was almost out of time and the empire could be on the verge of collapse. Nox inquired about how dire the current situation in the empire really was. He also pointed out that the emperor and empress were missing from tonight's gathering. Jendal just gave a cold reply, said they had some urgent business come up. Then, cool as a cucumber, he took another sip of his tea. The prince set his cup down and asked if Lunathia knew about the search for Moonlit Glade. Nox explained she doesn't know the real reason. She thinks it's all for his bride. The prince complimented him for deciding to keep the real truth under wraps. Jendal understood that Nox was afraid of everyone finding out about her abilities. The prince added that he could have demanded she participate in the search. Nox hesitated, because he didn't want that kind of fate for his wife. The prince chuckled and told him not to look so serious. He stopped Nox and said he'd give him one last piece of advice before he left. The smile was wiped clean off his face when he called him a shut-in. He explained that after all those battles, he'd made a ton of enemies who could be a threat to Lunathia. The prince was dead serious when he told him to watch his back. Meanwhile, the girl's own life was hanging by a thread. The menacing guy asked if she was that devil's bride. She wasn't about to answer his question, and instead asked him who he was. He grinned and said he was a survivor from the kingdom of Chevalon. Lunathia remembered that the kingdom had declared war on them, but got their butts kicked. The guy gritted his teeth and said that Nox snuffed out his soldier father's life. He was crying and begging to be allowed to go home to his family before he died. Nox iced him without hesitation, and now this guy wanted payback in kind. The psycho started screaming about how he was going to get his revenge personally. After the war, people were thirsting for vengeance more than ever, clueless about what went down on the battlefield. Lunathia was sure things weren't that simple, but he wasn't about to listen. Like he was in a trance, he kept ranting about taking away what he valued most. He pressed the blade harder and said it would be his bride's life. Suk instantly demanded he let the girl go, right now. Looks like threats didn't faze him, and he got a kick out of seeing Nox's brother. He said he'd be joining the girl in the afterlife. Seems like he's lost it, saying he's got nothing left to lose. The girl couldn't help but remember begging him to end it if she ever became a burden. She saw the guy was dead set on doing this, but she had her own mission too. She wanted to stay by Nox's side until she couldn't feel, see, or hear anything anymore. That's why she decided to read his future, to stop everything from happening. The second her hand touched the psycho, she was flooded with new info. She saw glimpses of Suk trying to shield her from something bad. He's gonna try to slam into the maniac, helping Lunathia break free. But doing that will basically be a one-way ticket for him. Lunathia realized this guy was trying to take them both out of the picture. Then the visions cut off, and she snapped her eyes open. She couldn't just stand there while that psycho was about to shank the Lord. He didn't know where the blow would land, but he was gonna protect her till the end. Lunathia screamed, realizing he was about to get nailed. She charged at the maniac and shoved him, buying them a couple of seconds. Then she grabbed the Lord's hand and hauled ass out of there. She started yelling her head off about the killer, hoping someone would hear them. Unfortunately, the Lord's bad health decided to screw him over. He collapsed to his knees, ready to cough up a lung after all that running. Lunathia freaked out even more when she saw his face twisted in pain. She was trying to figure out how to get his breath back. She thought it was seriously messed up, that there wasn't a single guard around. They should have bolted for the hall entrance, but Suk just couldn't run anymore. He was ready to throw himself on the fire if it meant Lunathia got out of there. No way was she letting that happen. She told him she wasn't leaving him behind. The guy said he'd just hide in the bushes and catch up with her later. Lunathia figured he might be feeding her a line just to get her to scram. She touched his hands and decided to see what would happen if she left. Next thing she knew, she was booking it toward the garden, leaving him all alone. In a flash, the psycho jumped him and raised his blade. The next thing she saw, Lord Suk was lying in a pool of his own blood. She could see she was completely out of juice, just like he was. Still, she couldn't just leave him here to kick the bucket. She said she'd distract the psycho so the Lord could make a run for it. Lunathia added that he'd have a better shot finding the entrance in the dark. The Lord tried to stop her, but she just charged right ahead. She told him not to sweat it and said she wouldn't let anyone die. The second she heard that telltale rustle, she bolted forward. She managed to get the maniac to turn his attention to her and spot her. Lunathia ran as fast as her legs could carry her, wondering if the Lord made it to the garden. She could feel herself getting heavier and heavier with every second she ran. The breaking point for her was when she tripped over a rock. She went down hard, feeling pain all over. She hesitated for a split second, and that's when the bloodthirsty psycho loomed over her. He was practically drooling, saying she was pretty feisty for a lady. The guy gave a twisted grin and said she'd be his first. His face twisted with rage, and he swore he'd make that devil pay. The girl froze, waiting for the end. Then, out of nowhere, Mr. Knox was right in front of her. He blocked the attack and said he could take him down even with a practice sword. No sooner had he said it than he knocked the knife right out of the maniac's hand. He saw his chance while the guy was stunned and slammed him to the ground. Didn't even need a blade to bring the psycho down. His regular punch was so powerful, the dude just crumpled from the pain. He ended the fight right there, boot-pinning the maniac to the dirt. He raised his sword, asking if he knew whose girl he tried to mess with. Knox added he should feel lucky his sword was made of wood. The maniac started screaming when Knox held the knife to his head, saying he was about to meet his maker. The next second, Knox left him and rushed over to Lunathia to check on her. He touched her cheek, apologizing for being late. Worry was written all over his face as he asked if she was hurt. The girl said everything was fine, then asked how he found her. Turns out, Soleil freaked out because he couldn't find her anywhere. Knox had a bad feeling, so he went out to the garden and bumped into Suk. Right then, Suk himself came running up with his bride-to-be. Lunathia immediately recognized the girl's familiar face. Turns out, she was supposed to see the Lord dead in a vision. To her surprise, Ruby thanked her for helping the Lord escape. The young guy agreed and said he managed to meet with Ruby and Knox. After that, he went on and on about how brave Lunathia is. The girl awkwardly looked down, trying to say she didn't do anything special. Even sassy Ruby went out of her way to thank her personally. It was clearly awkward for her to say all that, but she had to do it. On top of everything, she even apologized for being disrespectful. Lunathia was so shocked to hear that, she totally froze up. Knox explained that Ruby was worried about her and wanted to cheer her up. Ruby told him to shut his trap, then called him a real piece of work. Lunathia smiled. Realizing she saved a life and got help from Nox, she felt a rush of gratitude, but a sharp pain shot through her body. Every time she uses her powers, it comes with a serious price. Her head throbbed so bad, she started wailing like crazy. She was in so much pain, she felt like she could collapse. Lunathia clutched her head, feeling like someone was trying to rip her ears off. She finally woke up a couple of days later in her own bed. She frantically tried to recall what had happened. She remembered they arrived at the ball, and then Nox fought Rondell. Lunathia tried to piece together the lost memories, step by step. Finally, she managed to get back to the moment she was attacked. She immediately latched onto that important event in her mind. The girl remembered that Master Nox protected her, but couldn't recall any other details. She was trying to figure out what happened next. But Sierra interrupted her. Lunathia turned her head to greet the maid. Sierra was about to burst into tears of joy when she saw the girl. She suddenly realized she couldn't hear a word the maid was saying. The second the maid figured it out, she bolted straight for Master Nox. Watching that, Lunathia finally understood everything that had happened. She touched her ears and realized she'd gone deaf. It was because she'd predicted the future, like twice already. She thought she was ready for something like this, but reality hit way harder. In an instant, she felt totally cut off from everything. A couple of minutes later, Master Nox burst into the room. He immediately realized the girl wasn't responding to him at all. The man gently squeezed her shoulder to let her know he was there. Like nothing was wrong, she turned around and greeted her husband. Nox couldn't understand how she could smile so calmly. He didn't say another word and just held her tight. Lunathia was trying to figure out what he was doing, but he kept quiet. He thanked God out loud that she was finally awake. The girl was completely stunned when she realized she could hear Nox. He told her it had been 2 weeks since she'd collapsed unconscious in the garden. Still in his arms, she asked if she'd really been asleep that long. He said bitterly that he was afraid she wasn't going to wake up. For a second there, he thought she was gone for good. He said that even after seeing so much death, he wasn't ready for hers. It was hard for him to show his feelings, but right now, he couldn't hold back. He held her tighter and confessed that he didn't want to lose her. Lunathia got even more flustered and said she was really happy right now. She stroked his back and said she was glad to hear him say that. He looked into her eyes, like he was trying to figure something out. Nox mentioned that first she lost the sight in one eye, and then her hearing started to go. The girl asked him, scared, how he could have guessed that. He said she didn't even turn around when he came crashing into the room. He was about to list off all her symptoms, but she cut him off. She told him to hold off on any more of his guesses. Lunathia smiled and reminded him she promised to tell him everything herself. Nox agreed and suggested they talk about it over tea. Lunathia didn't get why they were sitting so close and personal. The guy leaned right up to her ear and said it was the only way to make sure she heard him. The whole thing was so weird. Even Urine left the room with a knowing smirk. Nox decided to get down to the real reason they were meeting. The guy figured out on his own that all these changes were the price she paid for her power. So, she decided to tell him about the grim future that was coming for her. Nox sadly realized the real reason she'd asked him to end things. The girl looked down and confirmed that he was right on the money. Nox asked if her family really couldn't see what she was going through. He immediately realized that was a stupid question and apologized. There was a hint of sadness in his voice as he said they were just using her. The girl explained that she just wanted them to love her. This got to Nox, and he just held his wife tighter. She told him she only had 6 months left to live. Even so, she felt relieved to finally open up to someone. She had no freaking clue how Nox was going to react. The girl was waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just scooted her back a bit. Then, real slow and careful, he stood up and looked over at his wife. He bolted towards the exit and told her to hang tight for a second. He ordered Urine to come out, saying he knew he was eavesdropping. Urine peeked out from behind the door, all guilty, and said he was just passing by. Nox said he didn't give a damn and ordered him to fetch something from the expedition stuff. As soon as Urine was gone, he turned back to Lunathia. He told her the time had come for him to spill his secrets. Nox decided to share what he'd managed to dig up about moongrass. He sat her back down on his lap, ready to drop some knowledge. The guy gently stroked her hair and decided to switch gears. While she was out cold, they managed to grill some witnesses about the psycho. Because she wasn't feeling up to it, they put the case on hold and left the creep locked up. Lunathia felt guilty, thinking she'd slowed down the investigation. She tried to apologize, but Nox thought he was the one who should be saying sorry. He was the one who put her in danger because of his position and influence. To his surprise, Lunathia perked up and told him not to talk like that. She smiled and reminded him that they're family, and it wasn't his fault. He just whispered back, not wanting to lose her because of his screw-ups. It was like a cry from the heart, and he deliberately didn't want Luna to hear it. So, the royal family took responsibility for keeping the perp locked up. They screwed up and let him in, which is why Jendal even sent a letter. During questioning, it turned out someone helped him break into the palace. Luna immediately asked if he even had an accomplice. Nox said this accomplice knew about the engagement party. It was clear they were just being played to take out the empress. Back home, she was known as the Divine Guardian, Michaela von Lysanrus. Thanks to her military strategies, they won the last war. Even though the emperor had a whole harem, she's the one who gave him an heir. A lot of nobles were pissed about how much pull she had in every corner of the empire. Jendal was actually the first one to float that theory, right after the banquet. Jendal said someone else was spotted near his mother's bedroom. The guards reported seeing someone lurking near the empress's chambers, and she wasn't expecting company. The theory is, he slipped away unnoticed during the commotion in the garden. During questioning, the accomplice knew the empress wasn't feeling well, and he knew a family secret. Only people close to the royal family knew about that. Nox figured it could even be someone from the upper crust, someone tight with the royal family. Jendal told him to personally lead the investigation and find Moonglade. That mission landed on Nox like a ton of bricks, but he couldn't back down. Lunathia was floored when she found out Her Majesty was sick. Nox told her they were keeping her serious illness under wraps. It was incurable, and all the royal family could do was keep her alive. So, the assassin knew the Empress wouldn't be able to fight back. They picked a time when she'd be at her weakest. If the attack worked, they could easily cover it up as death from the disease. It's totally possible the Emperor's concubines were in on it. Nox explained that's why he was tasked with finding the moonlit clearing. Before, he said he needed it for the most beautiful stone of all. He revealed there aren't any stones there, but there are petals with healing properties. According to the texts, petal tea could cure any ailment. Turns out, the legend of the gemstone was just a cheap trick. The stone manuscripts told a story about a flower that brings people back to life. Lunathia repeated the reason he was tasked with finding the moonlit meadow. Nox agreed and said the flower was the Empress's only hope for recovery. It not only cured sickness, but also restored lost sight and hearing. The girl froze in surprise, trying to figure out what he was getting at. Nox quietly whispered that he wanted to save her from what's coming down the road. He confidently declared that he would find the flower and restore her lost senses. Lunathia looked at him, surprised when he spoke of what's coming. He had no guarantee the flowers would heal her, but he was willing to gamble. He wanted to give her the bright future she deserved. Lunathia couldn't believe this guy was ready to do something like this for her. She wanted to say something, but clammed up, guiltily looking down. The girl still thanked him for his care and kindness. She looked up and said she wanted to help him find the moonlit glade. Nox agreed, but asked her to take it easy with her powers. The girl smiled and asked him to promise her something in return. She asked him to, end things for her if they failed. Lunathia said it so casually, it made his stomach drop. Still, he couldn't turn her down after she'd been asking for so long. Urine came back and showed them the thing they'd asked him to bring. Nox looked over the slab and told Lunathia he'd mentioned it before. This stone tablet tells the story of the lunar glade. The girl immediately started examining the stone tablet closely. It says here that the truth will be seen by whoever looks at the moon. Nox was surprised that Lunathia's ancestors' memoirs were written in the same font. Urine was stoked, since before it took them weeks to decipher the lines. The girl was super happy when she realized she could help them. It felt like a lucky break for her that she could help Nox without using her powers. Urine started to say something, but suddenly burst out laughing instead. He quietly said that they were acting more and more like an old married couple. Urine confided that Nox had been personally taking care of her all these weeks. Lunathia had a hard time believing that she was so important to Nox. Urine hurried off when Nox started asking what he was whispering about. Lunathia wondered if she could ever be a real wife to her husband. A week later, the girl was still toiling away at the translation. She managed to quickly decipher most of the tablets. She was working so hard that even Sierra could barely tear her away. A smile spread across Lunathia's face, showing she hadn't heard a thing. Sierra inhaled sharply and let out a scream the next second. Sierra said she understood how she felt and was happy that Nox might find a cure. Just like with the Empress, Nox only told the servants part of the truth about Lunathia. The maid mentioned again that she was expected and suggested she change her clothes. Lunathia still didn't get why, but she couldn't refuse. After a while, she found that Lord Sook and his fiancée had come to see her. The girl hurried to apologize for keeping them waiting. She admitted she hadn't even expected them to pay her a visit. The Lord smiled happily and decided to ask how she was feeling. Ruby said she didn't want to come to this backwater, but she was here on important business. Lunathia barely heard the newlyweds, but she got the gist of what they were saying. She decided to cut to the chase and talk about why they were really there. Nox suddenly popped up behind her and said Ruby had something for her. She waved toward a chest and said her mother had taken care of Nox's request. Nox reached for the box and said he'd had it made especially for her. Turns out, he'd arranged for it to be custom-built just for her. Lunathia was totally surprised when she took the box in her hands. She gazed thoughtfully at the strange object, trying to figure it out. Nox explained it was a hearing aid that would help her hear better. Ruby immediately yelled at them to stop acting all lovey-dovey in front of the guests. Turns out, they hammered out a peace treaty with the kingdom across the sea. In exchange for peace, they promised to help each other out, tech included. This device let the hard of hearing keep up with everyone else. Lunathia kept eyeballing the weird contraption. Duchess Fand made it. She had connections out the wazoo. Nox wrote her a personal letter, a request she couldn't refuse. Ruby cheekily said to consider it her thanks for saving the Lord. Looks like Lunathia was still reeling from the surprise. Lord Sook tried to gently explain that it was Ruby's way of showing gratitude. Nox just sighed, too tired to even touch that situation. Lunathia grinned, super happy, and thanked them for the awesome gift. Later that evening, the girl found herself alone in her room. She was stoked that she'd managed to get a little closer to Ruby. Now it seemed like those two were a perfect match. Their personalities just clicked. Lunathia herself tried to wrap up her work on the cipher. She suddenly remembered the letter she'd gotten earlier. Soleil had decided to reach out after that little incident at the banquet. Her whole family knew she'd passed out, but Soleil was the only one who seemed genuinely worried about her. She smiled, thinking it'd be cool to at least stay in touch with him. The girl froze, suddenly hearing a distinct knock at the door. Nox walked in and noticed she could hear even the faintest sounds now. Lunathia smiled, saying she could hear everything like she never lost her hearing at all. He sat down and told her Ruby doesn't know the real reason she needs the device. The guy added that he wouldn't be able to help if she did lose her hearing. He lowered his head and said he can only grant her wishes. The girl blushed, realizing he still remembers that diary. The man agreed and said he'd already granted one of her wishes. He asked her to tell him if there was anything else she desired. At first she was surprised, but then a bright smile lit up her face. She said sincerely that she'd be so grateful if he'd just live these moments with her. Man, she looked so damn cute right then. The Marquis's heart skipped a beat. She caught the shift in his vibe, even though he tried to play it cool. He was all, "It's nothing," but his face was totally giving him away. Nox chimed in, said they had to swing by and see someone first. Turns out, the Empress wanted to meet her outside the palace walls. She was floored when she heard the Empress wanted to apologize in person. Meanwhile, Lunatia's old man was still hitting the bottle hard. A total lush. After another bottle, Nicholas was acting less like a man, more like a beast. His wife tried to tell him he was killing himself, but he didn't give a damn. Once his lies came out, even their loyal customers bailed on the family. It got so bad, even Rosalind bailed on them for no reason. His rant got cut short when the maid announced a client had arrived. Being plastered, Nicholas didn't even register who it was at first. The maid tried to announce him, but he cut her off. The guy hid his face behind a top hat and apologized for the surprise visit. Nicholas jumped up, not believing someone of that stature was in his house. The man waved his hand, saying his client would pay him handsomely for a deal. Nicholas froze when he added that this job was top secret. He smirked slyly and said it involved the Emperor's own family. Meanwhile, Jendal was checking on his ailing mother again. Still, nobody's found a cure to save her from this sickness. He wanted to help her, but she refused and reminded him the Ilterns are arriving today. Jendal agreed, saying it was a great honor for them to see her. The woman asked him to call the servants to help her change. He tried to explain that she shouldn't push herself in her condition. The woman smiled at her caring son and said she'd be all right. She added that she had to survive for the sake of her beloved kingdom and son. On the way to the Empress, Lunathia asked if he'd met her before. Nox described her as a woman with a good heart, a sharp mind, and plenty of wit. Lunathia asked him to tell her how he became friends with Jendal. He told me they first met when he was studying at the Knight Orders Academy. The best students were called to train at the palace, and he went there with Urin. Including him and Urin, 30 more students showed up. That's when Nox ran into a spy who was planning to attack the royal family's son. Nox managed to take him down, and that's how he caught Gendel's eye. The kid said the spy had been acting shady from the get-go. When Gendel heard that, he just laughed and called him awesome. The guy looked at the prince kinda nervously when he said he'd be the next head of Iltern. After that, the prince smiled and said he liked him. He reached out his hand and called Nox just a regular dude who wasn't chasing fame. Meanwhile, Nox became friends with Urin, and they shipped out to war together. He was the fourth son of an Imperial Army general, so he had zero chance of being the next in charge. Lunathia was surprised they'd all known each other for so long. Gendel's mother embodied all the best qualities of her son. Knowing she didn't have much time left, Lunathia stepped out of the carriage. She looked around, taking in the unbelievable beauty surrounding her. After that, Nox took her hand and led her to the meeting place. A mansion for the Empress had been built in such a beautiful location. According to Nox, the Emperor built it for her so she could relax. What ruined the romance was the fact that an assassin could be lurking among the loyal subjects. Nox suddenly froze and told Lunathia to stop. The girl stopped dead, surprised, listening to everything around them. She turned around and unexpectedly spotted two strange people. She recognized the woman as one of the Emperor's companions. Unlike the companion, Lunathia couldn't place the guy next to her. He gave Nox a once-over and said he wasn't expecting to run into him here. The man tipped his hat, like he was showing respect, but it felt hollow. He said it was unusual to find a shut-in marquise at the estate. The man asked if they had come to meet the Empress in person. Lunathia suddenly realized she knew this guy. Standing before her was Marquis Lautria, a guy with just as much pull as Nox. Plus, the Marquis and His Majesty go way back. They're old buddies. She also remembered he wasn't at the engagement party. Nox gave the Marquis a polite greeting and agreed with what he said. Marquis Lautria immediately started asking what brought them there. Nox explained that his fiancée was attacked at the palace during the reception. Lunathia was relieved the incident hadn't gotten out, and no new rumors about Nox were spreading. The Marquis grinned and asked if that was why he didn't come alone. Lunathia stepped forward, deciding to introduce herself to the man right away. She bowed and gave her name as Lunathia Hassel. The concubine's face changed the second she heard the name Hassel. Lunathia noticed her confusion and asked if something was wrong. The woman covered her lips with her fan and apologized. Nox decided to ask what had brought them to the estate as well. Turns out, he came to meet with the Emperor to discuss political matters. The concubine mentioned she'd mixed up the date of the tea party with the Empress. Lunathia was surprised that the Empress was fulfilling her duties despite her health. The Marquis hurried off, citing a meeting with His Majesty. The moment he was out of sight, his smile vanished without a trace. Nox and Lunathia bowed to Lady Ribian before leaving. The woman sized them up real good, then waved her fan, ordering them to halt. She turned to Lunaria and said she'd caught her eye. Ribian invited her to a tea party as her guest. Lunaria instantly sensed something fishy about her intentions. Still, she couldn't exactly turn down the Emperor's favorite concubine. She bowed politely and said she'd be delighted to join her. Lady Ribian smiled back and said goodbye for now. Nox watched her go and said he knew how tough it was to say no. Even so, he flat out said he would have passed on that invite if he were Lunaria. Ribian was the top pick of the three concubines, and notorious for being a real piece of work. Nox figured she was the one who sent those assassins to the palace. Lunathia froze, realizing the mess she'd gotten herself into. Nox added that even with Lautria's backing, Gendel still didn't trust him. The girl never imagined life in the palace would be this intense. She remembered hearing her name mentioned once before, back at Hassel's place. Lunathia tried to remember, but she couldn't quite place it. A guard met them on the way, letting them know they were expected. The newlyweds looked ahead with confidence as the doors swung open. The girl's eyes immediately began to eagerly examine the room's interior. Contrary to all her expectations, a beautiful woman was sitting there. Mikola greeted Lunatia with a smile, like she was some fortune-telling lady. That line hit Lunatia like a ton of bricks, because she wanted none of that. The Empress saw the shock on Lunatia's face and quickly said she was just kidding. The girl froze, totally clueless how she was supposed to react to that. The Empress said Gendel had told her about the Hassel family legend. Lunatia racked her brain, trying to remember if the prince had mentioned anything. Nox quickly changed the subject and gave her a respectful greeting. Mikola told him to drop the formalities, because she couldn't stand them. Lunatia was struck again by how much Gendel looked like his mother. She was so impressed by Michela's kind nature that a smile crept onto her face. The Empress stood up, deciding to offer a personal apology. She smiled sweetly at the newlyweds and invited them to sit beside her. After that, they settled in for tea in a peaceful atmosphere. Michaela apologized that their guard hadn't been ready for such an attack. She added that it was entirely the royal family's fault, and they were deeply sorry. Lunatia told her not to apologize, saying none of the guests were hurt. Except for the royal guard, of course. They took the brunt of it. Michaela promised to do everything in her power to make sure this kind of tragedy never happened again. Then, out of the blue, she said that tracking down the traitor was proving to be a real pain. Basically, she was hinting that she was the real target of the assassination attempt. Lunathia was floored by how confident Michaela was in herself. She also thanked Knox for his efforts and gave his wife props. Knox coolly replied that he was really happy to hear the praise for his wife. Lunathia blushed at how openly she was being complimented. Michaela smiled and said there was no need to thank her for stating the obvious. She sincerely said how happy she was to see them today. Michaela added that her condition rarely allowed her to host events like this. She smiled and said she wanted to have tea with them again. Once alone with Knox, Lunathia shared what she was thinking. The obvious resemblance between her and his son jumped out at her. Knox just calmly replied that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Lunathia wanted to head home, get back to her old routine. To her surprise, Knox declared it was too soon for them to go back. He remembered seeing in her diary that she wished to take a stroll in a beautiful place. Knox didn't know how to make it happen and decided to get Urian's advice. He also had to get Jendel's opinion to figure things out. Ultimately, he decided to put everything on hold and go for that walk. Knox held out his hand and said the place wasn't far. Meanwhile, the Emperor's concubine was thoughtfully analyzing the meeting. She stretched out her leg when she was informed a guest had arrived. Rebienne told her to come in as soon as she heard Rosalind was there. Next thing you know, the girl bursts into her room and freezes. She said she brought her the most exquisite jewelry. Rebienne doubted, in a bored way, that these trinkets would be worth her time. She added that Rosalind's ambition was something else. She smiled, saying that was the only reason she bought her stuff. Rosalind grinned and called her her most valued customer. She said she wanted to hear that story before she showed off the jewelry. Rebienne was amused that the girl actually believed the moonlit meadow story. Rosalind was surprised the woman was suddenly interested in this meadow. Rebienne just said that she was inspired by her persistence. And she repeated that same story about the precious gem again. Rosalind said she'd make her the best piece ever, if she could find the field. Rebienne grinned, considering Rosalind's offer. She just blurted out, telling the girl to make her a tiara. It sounded so cocky that Rosalind's eyes went wide. Everyone knew that only the Empress could wear a tiara in their kingdom. Rebienne had big ambitions and wanted to snag the Empress's spot. That same day, she headed to the Empress for tea, but she was in for a surprise. The Empress greeted her in her usual way, since they hadn't seen each other in a month. Even so, Rebienne noticed how much she'd changed. They said their goodbyes, and then she just happened to run into Marquis Lautry. Their conversation only confirmed that Michaela was slowly fading away. Rebienne couldn't wait for that woman to kick the bucket. She wanted it so she could be the next in line for the throne. That's why she wanted a tiara made for herself. They also talked about Marquis Iltern living in the woods near the clearing. Rosalind was convinced no one could stop her from searching the forest. Rebienne was all for how fearless and brazen she was. Rosalind froze when the concubine said she'd met her little sister. Turns out, the girl immediately thought it was Cynthia. Rebienne clarified that the girl looked about her age. Rosalind bit her lip, pissed, when she realized it was Lunatia. Rebienne said she invited her to a tea party as an honored guest. Rosalind pretended she didn't mind, but she was burning up inside. Rebienne smirked and pointed out that she doesn't get along with her sister. She slyly asked if she wanted to take her down a peg. Rosaline couldn't pass up an opportunity like this, the kind Rebienne could give her. The concubine was skillfully playing her, using her to get what she wanted. Meanwhile, Lunatia was out for a walk with Iltern. Looks like he decided to show her this amazing field of flowers. They talked Knox into going on a daytime stroll. Knox asked her if this was her first time going on a walk like this. She told him how they almost took her when she was a kid, but she got sick. Her whole family decided to have fun without her and just leave her at home. Only Soleil thought about her and brought her back some flowers from the walk. It stung to hear her family talk about moments she wasn't a part of. Knox was there for her, saying he didn't have any warm memories of his family either. He smiled and suggested they bring the others here next time. Lunathia was thrilled with his idea and said yes. The scent of swirling petals inspired her, and the sight of them was breathtaking. She wanted to remember this moment forever. This time spent with Knox. She was even ready to die, knowing she'd experienced something like this. They left the clearing, and then she asked where they were headed. The man pointed ahead and said that their next goal was that way. The girl was surprised when it dawned on her exactly where he was taking her. Meanwhile, Sierra hoped that the newlyweds were having a good time. Urine smiled, noting how crazy Sierra was about Lunathia. The girl admired how Lunathia smiled every day, despite her illness. She could understand it. Being the middle child in a big family, even she knew the younger kids always got off easy, while the older ones got stuck with everything. Still, the Lunati family's problems were different from Sierra's troubles. They were the exact reason the young lady was struck with a terminal illness. The girl was surprised when she noticed a strange commotion in the street. Turns out, the soldiers were back from their expedition, and her sweetheart was among them. He decided to go find out if they'd managed to find the moon herb. Sierra decided to go with him, so she could see her Roberto. They had no idea what was coming until they saw something that completely blew their minds. Meanwhile, Lunatia was on the next leg of their little walk. Knox led her to a church that hadn't been used in ages. Jendal told him about her, hinting that they should spend some quality time alone. That's why Knox decided to show her a place that meant a lot to him. He said thoughtfully that only this place held a special significance for him. The guy asked her if she wanted to go inside and reached for the handle. Then they both glanced warily as the doors swung open. Lunathia stepped forward and carefully examined the interior. Looking at it, you'd never guess the church was abandoned. Knox explained that secret wedding ceremonies used to be held here. It was right here that his father proposed to his real mother. Lunathia was surprised at how easily he talked about it. Turns out, Knox figured his little brother might have spilled the beans. She said yes and apologized for finding out his secret. He just said it was cool, 'cause he was gonna tell her anyway. He didn't want to hide anymore that his mom died during childbirth. His dad and his mom had a secret thing going on. After a pause, he said he didn't exactly approve of what his parents did. This kind of thing happened with nobles. But he felt bad for his brother's mom. Lunatia looked at her husband, surprised at how calmly he was talking. He understood that their love was stronger than common sense. Thinking about them, he decided he wanted to share the whole story with her. Lunatic's heart skipped a beat, realizing he was willing to trust her with this. The girl smiled softly and agreed with Knox's point of view. He asked if she wasn't even going to judge them for it. Lunatic didn't see the point, since they'd done it following their hearts. The man smiled, thinking he'd always dreamed of hearing those words. After a short pause, he looked into her eyes and thanked her for that. Knox smiled gently and said how glad he was that he'd brought her here. In the end, they stayed in the church until the crack of dawn. It was too late to head back to the mansion, so she suggested staying at a hotel. Only then did he notice a moonraven flying toward them. The girl immediately started freaking out that something might have gone wrong. Knox scanned the report in a heartbeat, and then his face just fell. Turns out Robert's squad was searching for moonlit glade, but they all came back messed up something fierce. Lunathia was so shocked, she was completely speechless. The weirdest thing was, the soldiers didn't have a scratch on them. Knox apologized and said they needed to head home ASAP to figure this out. Lunathia agreed without hesitation, thinking about the people she cared about. In just 1 year, these people had become more important to her than her own family. That's why she prayed the whole way home that they'd be okay. When the newlyweds got back to the mansion, it was total chaos. Yoren apologized for having to cut their date short. He said that he and the guys thought they were going to be stuck at the hotel overnight. Seems like Yoren especially loved busting their chops about the air. Knox shut him down, threatening to make him pay for the crude jokes. The guy threw up his hands and said they already had enough crap to deal with. After that little chat, they hurried into the room where the soldiers were laid out. Sierra immediately called for Lunathia while standing next to Robert. She apologized for them crashing their date. Lunathia told her not to apologize and to just explain what the heck was going on. Robert barely managed to say that their squad was following intel from the decoded tablets. Thanks to them, they discovered a cave that no one had ever seen before. The other soldiers winced, remembering the horrifying screech of the bugs. Lunatia cautiously asked them to tell her about these bugs. They looked like moths, but they had bright colors and red eyes. They didn't try to attack the soldiers, but they emitted a terrible screech. The sound was so awful that they hurried to get out of the cave. Knox crouched down next to them and asked if they'd made it to the deepest part of the cave. He said they couldn't because of some moldy fungus that gave off a disgusting smell. So the soldiers were basically taken out of the game. There weren't any beasts in the cave, but nature seemed to be protecting it from prying eyes. Robert apologized for not being able to handle the mission. He also said he was sorry for cutting their evening short. Lunathia wanted to back Robert up, but Knox beat her to it. He said Robert did the right thing, Since their goal was to scout the area, Robert managed to protect his teammates and keep them out of harm's way. Yurin said that even though they didn't get further, they got some seriously valuable intel. There was a strong chance lunar grass was hidden in that cave. Lunathia tensed up, figuring they were able to get that far. Yurin added that they should really prep for the next run. While they were brainstorming different options, an idea popped into Lunathia's head. Everyone froze when they saw her hand reach up. Dead serious, she volunteered to go into that cave. Meanwhile, the Emperor's concubine was having a damn good time, sipping wine, surrounded by a bunch of hotties. She looked up when a familiar guy greeted her. He grinned and said he never expected to see her in a place like this. She replied that even noble ladies need some alone time. Rebienne started talking about how much she missed the peace and quiet of the palace. She also reminded him that he was the one who showed her this place in the first place. His eyes lit up when he mentioned how they used to use it for secret hookups. The woman calmly set down her glass and said they had some things to discuss. She waved her hand dismissively at the guards, ordering them to leave them alone. Once the guards were gone, she flicked open her fan and offered him a seat. The woman looked at her accomplice, waiting for the details. She asked how his plan to deal with the queen was progressing. The man smirked and said everything was going swimmingly. He added that he'd even managed to find some powerful allies, but didn't say who. He figured they needed to take out the empress while she was vulnerable. Rebienne replied, annoyed, that he talked about it like she could be saved. She revealed that the woman was sick and getting worse every single day. She was blown away when she heard rumors the prince was hunting down moonpetal herb for her. The Marquise was equally shocked when he realized she'd already heard about it. The woman called it a crazy coincidence that there's a magic-infused stone on that field. She smirked and mentioned her jeweler was personally searching for it on her behalf. The Marquis stroked his chin, all intrigued, like he was loving this. Word on the street is, the prince tasked Marquis Iltern with finding that field. Rebienne said that nobody told them they couldn't join the search party. The concubine was determined to find that field first and snag that stone for herself. Greed blazed in the Marquis's eyes as he offered to find that field personally for her. He laid it on so thick, she couldn't help but crack a smile. Rebienne stared daggers at the Marchioness, calling it a tempting offer. Meanwhile, Lunatia was fighting tooth and nail to salvage this operation. Just like we figured, everyone was freaked out by her crazy plan. Nox said it was a no-go, that she was totally unprepared for that kind of mission. Lunatia explained that her condition made her immune to all that stuff. She made a good point, but Nox couldn't risk it, plain and simple. Yurin got why she wanted to help, but it all seemed like a really bad idea to everyone. Lunatia froze, realizing she'd burned her bridges. She was running out of time, and she wanted to pull her weight. Looks like Nox was starting to realize she wasn't backing down. She squeezed his hand, saying she couldn't pass up an opportunity like this. She flashed a smile and promised to come back safe and sound. No problem. Yurin noticed how quickly Nox's mood had shifted. He finally caved and gave her the rundown. He told her she had 1 hour before he came looking for her. After she thanked him, Nox admitted he just couldn't say no to her. He remembered her sweet smile again and said he'd be waiting right there. The guy kept his eyes glued on her, watching her walk away. Lunatia agreed with everything he said and then bolted forward. She snapped into focus instantly, lighting her way with a flashlight. She even took out her hearing aid before moving forward. To make things worse, Lunathia's bad eyesight meant she didn't spot the moths right away. She kept telling herself they weren't gonna attack her. Even though they made this nasty chirping sound, she could only hear echoes of it. And just like that, she made it through the first tough part. She hadn't gone much further when she stumbled upon some moldy fungus. She could still catch a whiff of that awful, gag-inducing stench. Still, it was bearable, since her sense of smell was kinda shot too. Even though she wasn't using her gift, her 5 senses were slowly fading. After another few steps, she realized she'd gone even deeper. The second she looked up, she saw something she definitely wasn't expecting. Just like she figured, no moonlit clearing in the cave. But there was another inscription. The girl cautiously moved a little closer, hoping for another clue. She dipped her hand in the water, checking how deep it was. Lunathia quickly kicked off her boots so she wouldn't get them wet. Next thing you know, her bag of supplies was sitting at the water's edge too. Now, chest deep in the water, she made her way to the inscription on the stone. It said that those who came this far would be told a secret. She was surprised when she read that the secret had to do with finding the moonlit clearing. Too bad Lunathia couldn't take the inscription with her. She had to memorize everything. She just brushed her hand against it, and bam, she found this box. She checked it out real close, looking for anything new. Lunathia couldn't figure out how to open it, since she didn't have a key. Then, just a second later, she saw there was writing on it too. It was addressed to whoever had the gift, asking them to take it and not look back. She could only make out bits and pieces, but the last part was pretty clear. Lunathia guessed that her ancestors left the message. She hugged the box tight and memorized the message on the plate. Meanwhile, Nox and Urine were freaking out. They were so worried. The guy was ready to rush off after his girl right then and there. Consequences be damned. It took Urina lecturing him for ages before he finally calmed down and shut up. They were breathless when they looked back at the cave entrance again. Lunathia came running towards them, safe and sound. Nox immediately bolted after her, wanting to know what the heck happened to her in there. He started pulling off his coat, asking if she was hurt anywhere. She wanted to tell him the good news, but he threw his coat around her and said it could wait. Right now, all he cared about was making sure she got some rest. She tried to say she was fine, but he was being totally impossible. Urina smiled and said it was best not to argue with Nox right now. He added that she could try to calm him down in her own way later. Lunathia looked at the guy and realized he'd been worried about her the whole time. She wanted to shake off his hand and change her clothes, but he wasn't having it. The girl turned and said she'd like to spend some time with him. She loved the warm touch of his hands and the care she felt all around her. She wanted to head back to the palace, get some rest, and then spill everything she'd learned. Finally, after a while, they got back before nightfall. As soon as their carriage got close, Sierra rushed out to meet them. Lunathia smiled and said the trip was quick and easy. Robert gave a polite bow and said they were still being haunted by bad dreams. Nox ordered Sierra to get a warm bath and clean clothes ready for the girl. She rushed to grab the letter that had arrived for Lunathia after they left. The maid held out a letter to the girl, covered in bizarre designs. Lunathia was surprised that anyone would even bother sending her mail. Turns out, this letter was sent by the concubine way back in the dead of night. She smirked, thinking she needed to get ready for her guest's arrival. She wanted to do this for her dear friend Rosalind and the moonlit glade. The woman grinned wickedly and challenged her to a little game in her mind. Meanwhile, Lunathia was just getting changed after taking a bath. The cave was so cold and filthy, she was chilled to the bone. Urine called out to her unexpectedly in the hallway, stepping out of his office. He suggested going inside so they could talk to Nox. The man calmly asked her if she'd finished up her business. He asked her to sit next to him, saying he was ready to hear everything she saw in that cave. She picked up a cup and told him about the map that showed the location of the moonlit clearing. Lunathia mentioned that it was engraved on a tablet, which she memorized. Unfortunately, she couldn't take it with her, so she could only commit it to memory. Nox smiled and patted her on the head, telling her she did a great job. The girl was flustered, feeling that she still couldn't get used to his praise. She blushed so hard she almost forgot what she wanted to say. Lunathia mentioned that besides the map, there was also a message on the tablet. Moonlit Glade only showed up during a full moon, which made finding it a real pain. After figuring out when the next full moon was, they started checking out the box. Urine found out it had a lock that opened in a special way, but nobody knew how. Lunathia suggested they chill for a bit before pushing on with the search. She put her cup down and said that was all the info she could dig up. Urine grinned and said they were one step closer now. Nox said they needed to talk about a new problem. An invite from Rebienne. They were shocked how fast it showed up, because the party was in like 3 days. Nox's face went dark, and he said he had a bad feeling about it. Lunathia said turning it down would be a major blow to the Iltern family's reputation. Among the nobles, it was an unspoken rule. You just didn't refuse someone higher up the social ladder. It was basically seen as a slap in the face, a total diss to whoever sent the invite. Lady Rebienne knew this rule inside and out. Nox knew that was true, but being alone with Rebienne was seriously risky business. He'd even blown off tea with Marquis Fand and his wife once. His mom reamed him out for it, which gave Lunathia an idea. She flat out declared she was going to that tea party. Nox was bummed that he couldn't even shield her from those blue bloods. Lunathia just smiled and told him not to talk crazy because they're family. The next day, she headed to the reception at the palace. She walked into the room and greeted Rebienne with respect. Lunathia looked absolutely stunning in her outfit. You couldn't help but notice. You can imagine her surprise when she found Rebienne all alone. She never even considered it could just be the two of them. Rebienne plastered on a sickeningly sweet smile and thanked her for coming. Meanwhile, Soleil decided to sneak into Lunathia's room again. Despite all her letters, he still felt worried about his sister. Our father's changed a lot, shut himself off, scared about what's coming. Mom's like stuck in the past, doesn't want to talk to anyone. Even our adorable little sister Cynthia seems off. She tracked down Soleil again, just to whine and spill her guts. The girl started bawling again, needing him to tell her she's cute. Soleil, again, told her she's gorgeous and charming, like always. He used to hate how full of herself she was. But something's different now. Ever since meeting the Marquise, she's lost her confidence and gotten super down. Now he's got to reassure her 10 times a day, telling her she's pretty and adorable. Soleil jumped back from his sister when he spotted Rosaline walking towards them. He bolted out of the room right away to talk to her. The guy was stoked she was back, especially with all the drama in their family. Rosalind sadly apologized, like he totally jumped to the wrong conclusions. She said she just came back for her things and would be leaving soon. Soleil thought she should at least talk to their dad and knock some sense into him. Rosalind scoffed, saying they shouldn't drag their older sister down with them. She took advantage of Soleil's shock and left without another word. Cynthia immediately rushed over to Soleil, begging him to tell her what he heard from their sister. But he was so stunned, he could barely stand. He always thought they were a happy family. But Lunathia was right all along. For the first time, Soleil understood the real reason she ran away from them. Meanwhile, Lunathia herself was stuck dealing with Rebienne. She quickly sat down across from him and acted surprised. Rebienne smiled and said she wanted to chat with her in private. Lunathia had no clue what the real point of this tea party was. Even though she couldn't smell, she could still feel the heavy scent of incense. Rebienne confessed that she was friends with her older sister. Lunathia finally realized she'd heard the name royal concubine Rosalind before. She added that Rosalind always shared stories about their family with her. Luna said she learned from her sister that she was the second princess of the Alban kingdom. Rebienne agreed and said she became a concubine for her country's safety. Her smile changed when she said he wasn't interested in concubines at all. She added that he was only in love with his wife, and they just got the title. After that, she noticed Lunathia wasn't touching her tea. Lunathia had to take a sip, just so she wouldn't seem rude. Rebienne kept that fake smile plastered on her face, waiting for her to drink. After a beat, she said that she was a little different from the other concubines. She came right out and said she wanted to change her situation. Lunathia froze, trying to figure out why she suddenly felt so dizzy. She immediately guessed that something had been slipped into her tea. Her vision started blurring, and she kept seeing things that weren't there. Rebienne stood up and figured she was already feeling the effects. She explained it was the effect of a white incense, invented in her kingdom. "Just a whiff of this stuff," the concubine said, stroking the girl's hair. "And people will confess to anything." Still, she noticed it wasn't hitting her quite like it should. That's why she slipped those seeds into the tea, to really juice things up. She smirked, figuring the girl's taste buds were shot, so she wouldn't notice the bitterness. "Rebienne," she said, naming the master, Nox, and Lunacia echoed her right after. She locked eyes with Lunacia, waiting for her to spill everything she knew about Moonlit Glade. After a while, she woke up with the thought that she had been talking to Nox about Moonlit Glade. A memory flashed before her eyes. The haze and his face in it. She lifted her head and saw Rebienne looming over her. The girl was so caught off guard, she practically jumped off the couch. The concubine said she fainted during the tea party. Thanks to that, Lunathia was able to piece together the events, barely. She grabbed her head, feeling like it was about to explode. At first, she blamed it on the fatigue that had built up over the last few days. The girl hurried to get up from the couch and apologized. She bowed and said that she should head back. Rebienne gave a predatory smile and said she had a wonderful time with her. She said goodbye to the girl, hoping she'd get another chance like this. Jendal spotted Lunathia by chance from his office window. He didn't know why she suddenly showed up at the palace. He knew something was up right away, since the family never invited her to the palace. Lunathia was kicking herself for dozing off during such an important meeting. She tried to recall the details of the conversation, but something distracted her. She turned around and saw Lord Suk, with Ruby tagging along. The girl said she'd come to the palace because a concubine invited her. She was happy to run into them both after such a stressful meeting. Suk explained he was escorting Ruby to invite Her Majesty to a dinner. Lunathia was immediately taken aback when he mentioned a formal dinner. Ruby said it was an event her family puts on every year. All the big shots get together and talk about everything that's happened in the country over the year. Lunathia remembered her mom always wanted to go there, but their family never got invited. Suk was stoked they bumped into each other today. Then, he pulled a letter from his pocket and held it out to her. Ruby totally blushed when he said he was giving the invite to Lady Lunathia. Unlike his brother, Ruby didn't want to see Nox at the fancy dinner. Lunathia decided to smooth things over and thanked Ruby for the invitation. Ruby pretended she wasn't flustered and tried to fire back with some sass. Still, you could tell she was trying to be nice about it. Lunathia quickly scanned the invitation to check the date. And wouldn't you know it, the dinner's on the night of the full moon. She was totally thrown by Lady Ruby's overly sweet invitation. Ruby saw the girl's confusion and said she hadn't invited them to become besties. Lunathia just smiled and decided to talk it over with Nox. The girl didn't immediately notice the piece of paper that fell on the floor. She quickly picked it up and realized it was a list of invitees. Lunathia scanned the list of invited aristocrats carefully. She was super surprised when she spotted a familiar name. Lunathia couldn't figure out what her dad, who'd never been invited before, was doing on that list. She went to Ruby to find out the real reason they were there. Ruby admitted she had no idea Nicholas was her father. She got all quiet when Sook asked who vouched for the Viscount. After thinking for a second, Ruby remembered it was Marquis Lautria who did it. That little detail just blew Lunatia's already shocked mind even more. She couldn't wrap her head around why a guy like that would even associate with her dad. The girl decided to find out if the Emperor's family was invited. Lord Sook replied that they had invited the Empress and her son. He added thoughtfully that he was really worried about Her Highness's health. She seemed kind of sickly to him during their last meeting. Ruby scolded him, saying she was worried about him because of his cough. She told the servants to let her know the second he felt unwell or started acting weird. Lunathia pondered his words about the Empress looking so sickly. She realized their lives could be cut short any day now. She also had a bad feeling about her father's patron. The girl quickly retied the list and gave it back to Ruby. She also humbly thanked her for letting her see it. Lunathia smiled goodbye and said she'd be waiting for her invitation. Once alone, she continued to reflect on recent events. She couldn't shake the connection between Marquis Lautria and Lady Rebian. Lunathia considered using her ability, but Nox might not be happy about that. She only realized at the last minute that she was lost in the palace. The girl glanced around thoughtfully, trying to find a way out of the palace. She accidentally heard the clanging of swords and figured it was the knights' training grounds. Lunathia ducked behind a pillar and started watching the knights. She was surprised when she spotted Rondel. Looks like he's been working hard on his skills since his defeat. He tried every attack he could think of, but he still ended up flat on his back. After getting owned, he challenged her to a rematch. Turns out, getting kicked out of the second division is what lit a fire under his butt. Lunathia just realized that the last time she saw him was at the ball. Rondel claimed that his family almost disowned him because of it. Still, losing really was a valuable lesson for him. Only then did he realize how insignificant he was, and that he hadn't accomplished anything. To her surprise, he admitted that he'd achieved everything thanks to his ex-fiancée. Lunathia couldn't even imagine him ever thinking about that. He couldn't keep shamefully relying on a woman, and he didn't even go near her anymore. Now, he hoped to apologize to her someday, when he was stronger. Hearing everything she needed to, Lunathia hurried to leave the area. She remembered Rondel as a man who only relied on her strength. But now, he was able to change thanks to Master Nox's lesson. What happened to him didn't concern her anymore, but it did slightly change her opinion of him. So, the girl finally rolled back home, just as the sun was setting. Nox was seriously ticked off that she was back so late. He chewed her out, saying he was about to head over to the palace to drag her back. His heart just about stopped when she said she'd passed out at the tea party. She tried to talk him out of calling a doctor and just get straight to the point. Nox was cool with that, but she still needed to greet her guest. Lunathia was caught off guard when she heard she had a visitor. The next thing she knew, some dude just popped into the room. Standing right there was Soleil, all smiles, and she hadn't seen him since the ball. He gave his sister a big hug and said he just wanted to check in on her. The kid instantly regretted it when Nox hauled him away by the scruff of his neck. He ripped into him for showing up uninvited and lunging at his fiancée. Lunathia was expecting this kind of behavior from her brother and told him to let go. The girl crouched down and looked up at her brother. She smiled calmly and suggested they talk in her room. The moment they were alone, Soleil was immediately taken aback by her fiancé's character. He called the 30 minutes they spent in the same room an absolute ordeal. The girl decided to reveal a different side of her beloved Marquis to him. She explained that he was the kindest man she had ever met. Soleil was willing to believe it, simply because she thought so. Out of the blue, he asked if she found more happiness here than back at the Hassel estate. Lunathia looked away, saying she'd found her happiness right here. Looks like her answer finally put Soleil's doubts to rest. He bowed, sincerely apologizing for using her just to gain power. Lunathia never thought she'd hear something like that in a million years. He confessed that he'd finally seen his family's true colors after she left. He said he only now understood the living hell she'd gone through all those years. Soli kept his head down, saying he understood how she must feel. She told him to look up and revealed that she'd almost lost 5 of her senses because of their demands. Soli was stunned. He couldn't even imagine the damage was that severe. Looks like it took him a second to even figure out what she was saying. Lunathia clenched her fists and said she was going to lay the truth on him, right then and there. She basically told him she was a goner, unless the moonflower could help her out. Soli started shaking like a leaf when he realized it was his fault. He even remembered snatching some old book from her when he was a kid. That's why she couldn't read the notes. It was all his doing. He dropped to his knees, begging her to forgive him for everything he'd done. Soleil was bawling at her feet, asking if there was any way he could help her out. Lunathia stood up and said his regret was enough for her. She gripped his shoulders and told him it was up to him now to decide what to do with this information. She was positive those people would never buy into something like that. Soli said they needed to know the price of their happiness. She was surprised when he mentioned that her father and Rosalind were acting weird. She said something big was brewing and asked him to spill the details. Meanwhile, Sierra was staring daggers at the cups in the kitchen, lost in thought. She was so intense about it, even the other maid noticed her mood. Turns out, she was debating whether to serve the cakes and tea right now. Part of her wanted to, but she knew Knox wanted Soli gone. She even considered, let's just say, adjusting her brother's tea. Sierra shook the container a bit, thinking it was a brilliant idea. You can imagine her surprise when Prince Gendel showed up right behind her. He explained he'd just arrived at the Marquise's estate. He said he was on his way to see Knox, when he got pulled into an interesting chat and some tasty tea. He gave her a playful wink, saying that's exactly why he came. Sierra was shaking from the shock and offered to take him there. She practically hustled him out of the kitchen and led him to Knox. He announced he had a crucial mission for the Marquis of the lunar eclipse. Turns out, an allied ship was due to arrive in 3 days, heading south on the sea. Knox frowned, looking annoyed, and asked why he needed to meet them. Gendel explained that Marquis Fond had built a bridge of friendship with that country. The fancy dinner also included opening presents. Knox had never been to a Fond family event before. The prince explained it was because Madame Ruby just didn't like him. He added that his mom and dad were supposed to meet them originally. Unfortunately, Gendel's mom took a turn for the worse yesterday. Luckily, nobody knows she's currently out of commission. It would stir up unwanted gossip if nobody from their side greeted the guests. That's why they decided to pick him to fill in. Gendel explained that some common troublemakers had popped up down south. They weren't a huge deal, but having a pro down there wouldn't hurt. Knox was seriously stuck on his request, one he couldn't exactly refuse. Gendel was surprised how quickly his buddy agreed to it. The prince snapped his fingers and said he wanted to see him with a +1. That's exactly why he suggested Knox bring Lunathia along. Knox wasn't thrilled about that, knowing things could get hairy there. Just then, Lunathia showed up to greet the prince. Gendel grinned and told her to come on in. The girl bowed, apologizing for being late. Knox immediately started grilling her about how her talk with her brother went. Right before they said goodbye, she told him to remember something important. He asked her to let him know right away in a letter if her father and Rosalind started acting weird. Soli agreed to her request, then unexpectedly got all awkward. After everything that went down, he seriously asked to still be her twin brother. Lunatic was struck again by how important that was to the kid. She smiled and said he was the only family she had in that hellhole. Before she left, she asked him to think things through before he did anything. She gave him a warm smile and called it advice from his twin sister. Soli clenched his fists, looking determined, and promised he'd try his best. After that, he turned toward the exit and said goodbye. Before finally leaving, he asked her, his voice trembling, not to kick the bucket. She couldn't promise him that, but realized this was the first time she'd really talked to family. Knox gently stroked her shoulder and gave a small smile. Gendel cut them off, jokingly calling them the real newlyweds. He said he was happy they were getting along so well, and offered her a seat next to him. Knox followed her lead and sternly told him not to push it. Gendel grinned again, all playful, and asked Lunathia if she liked the ocean. He sounded so chill, it totally caught her off guard. The prince said it was amazing to sail on a ship across the open sea. It was like he was trying to get her hooked before explaining what was really going on. The girl awkwardly looked down and said she'd never seen the ocean before. After a moment's thought, she said she'd like to see the ocean. Knox wasn't happy that the prince tried to pull a fast one on Lunathia. The prince chuckled and admitted he's a pushover when it comes to his wife. Giving a sly wink, he said he was really counting on them to take on this mission. Knox briefly explained to the girl exactly what their task would involve. He added that the Fand family was also involved, so they really couldn't refuse. Yurin smirked and said he couldn't believe Knox even got invited. Before leaving, he said it wouldn't have been possible without Lunathia. Lunathia asked if he was seriously questioning whether she'd go or not. The girl said she could stay at the mansion if he just told her to. The guy thought for a second, then asked if she wanted to see the ocean. He remembered promising to show her some beautiful places. The girl instantly realized he was talking about those entries in her diary. She was already grateful for everything she'd experienced with him and didn't want to ask for more. He'd already done so much for someone who was about to lose her sight. Finally, she smiled and said she'd go with him. Yurin was stoked by her decision and immediately jumped in to back it up. He added that everything would be cool, even if some trouble showed up. After some time, Lunatia was finally able to see the endless ocean. She never even imagined it was actually this huge. Knox said they prepped an Imperial warship to enforce anti-piracy measures. Figured they'd flex their muscles for the Allies while they were at it. Lunathia asked how soon they'd be seeing the rest of the fleet. She admitted that just imagining the sheer scale of the world took her breath away. Seeing her smile, Knox figured bringing her here was worth it. He suggested they sail beyond the seas together. Once they found the Moonflower, Lunathia couldn't help but remember that same request from her twin brother. Hearing all this, she couldn't help but start wanting to live. A sailor suddenly announced fog rolling in from the southwest. Knox tensed up, knowing that's the direction the Allies were supposed to be coming from. Lunathia had always heard the sea was a real disaster waiting to happen. She even considered trying to see the future through Knox. He snapped her out of her thoughts, telling her not to lean so far over the railing. The girl didn't want to use her powers, but things were getting desperate. She closed her eyes, mentally crossing her fingers that nothing bad would happen. Another crew member announced they'd spotted an Allied ship. The weirdest thing was, there wasn't a soul on board. Knox cautiously said they needed to get closer and check it out. Lunathia tried to warn him about the danger, but they didn't have a choice. He gently stroked her cheek and asked her to wait there while he checked out the ship. His steady voice was calming, but she still felt uneasy. She begged him to at least let her see the future before he left. Knox refused, reminding her that he asked her to only use her gift in emergencies. He meant those times when she'd need to protect herself. She tried to argue, but he showed her his wicked-looking sword. Knox grinned and said this baby works on land and sea. Just a couple of minutes later, he had a team ready to check it out. Once they were on the Allied ship, they found it was totally deserted, just like he said. He suggested they split up and search the ship for any little clue. As soon as he stepped into the cargo hold, he found some kind of wild beast. This was a tiger that only lived in those warmer climates. Knox figured this pet was used at the Fond family's party. He knew it was a simple wish and couldn't help but imagine Lunathia's joy. The guy jumped to his feet the second he heard that weird sound. He peered between the bulky crates and noticed something. There sat 4 tied-up servants, left behind in the hold. He introduced himself as someone from the Sunris Empire and asked if they were from Mura. The guy said they were caught in a fog and then attacked by bandits. It was only at the last second that Knox realized it could be a trap. Unfortunately, he only figured it out when a thug was already behind him. Meanwhile, Lunathia watched the ship with growing anxiety. She tensed up when a crew member reported that they were being boarded by pirates. The next second, a bloodthirsty bandit's knife went right through his back. Lunathia froze, realizing they were completely surrounded. One of them yelled, all excited, that they'd taken the ship and had hostages. They demanded all the gold in exchange for the people. They tried to drag Lunathia away, but she started to worry about Knox. Back on land, Jendel had no idea about the sudden attack. His mother hoped that the Alliance landing would go off without a hitch. She was still concerned about the Iltern family, but the prince reassured her. Still, the possibility of pirates showing up gave her the creeps. Jendel smirked and said she didn't know half the stuff about his best bud. There were a ton of stories about how brave he was on the battlefield. People compared him to a wild tiger or a wolf, like, all the time. He added that Knox was a beast when he had people to protect. The prince squeezed his mom's hand and told her to focus on getting better. He reassured her with a smile, saying he'd be waiting to hear from their friends. Meanwhile, Lunathia tried to calm herself, thinking pirates were nothing compared to her husband. She remembered how confident he looked heading onto that ship. That gave her hope, but her heart was still filled with worry. Meanwhile, the pirates figured out she was some kind of high-class lady. They were all jacked up, arguing about the best way to handle her. One of them was fantasizing about what he'd do to her back at his place. but he was about to get a rude awakening. They started shaking in their boots when they realized their time was up. The next thing they knew, they were sprawled out on the deck, bleeding from some nasty wounds. All this went down right in front of their buddy, who was totally freaked out. Nox was pissed that these scumbags even laid eyes on his Lunathia. The pirate tried to hide behind the hostages, not knowing Nox had already freed them. The guy kept throwing out threats, thinking it would save his skin. Nox just calmly raised his sword and said his suspicions were confirmed. He let the pirate know he'd taken care of every last one of them. The thug felt a chill run down his spine, seeing their lifeless bodies. He looked Nox dead in the eye and called him a total monster. Lunathia could finally breathe easy when she found him safe and sound. She jumped out of her skin when she spotted the enemy hiding with a gun. The guy was ready to blast his enemy right in the back. Lunathia screamed at the top of her lungs, calling him her precious Nox. He spun around instantly, hearing his wife's desperate cry. In a split second, he managed to dodge the pirate's shot. The robber cowered in the corner, terrified when he realized he'd missed. To his utter astonishment, the waves suddenly started rocking the ships like crazy. The sudden squall sent that thug tumbling right off the deck. He splashed into the open sea, which pretty much guaranteed he wouldn't die peacefully. Looks like Lunathia was in the same boat and didn't manage to grab hold of anything. The next thing she knew, she was plummeting straight into the deep blue sea. Nox tensed up instantly, scared stiff for his wife. As she sank, Lunathia felt like she'd been thrown into a world without feeling. She couldn't help but wonder if this was how it was all going to end for her. She'd almost forgotten that she still had someone who was ready to fight for her to the bitter end. He swam towards her, trying to wrestle her life away from the ocean's fury. In the end, he actually managed to save the girl from a tragic end. As soon as she came to, she spotted a massive tiger. Despite the animal's smile, she immediately cowered in fear. The maid apologized, explaining she'd let the animals out of their cages for inspection. She smiled and said they were trained not to attack people. Lunaria immediately smiled back when she noticed how friendly the animal was. Before she could even take a step towards it, the tiger licked her. The animal captivated her so much, she even forgot about Nox. He smoothed back his wet hair and said that all the pirates were their prisoners now. Now she could finally breathe easy, happy that everyone was safe. Nox asked if she'd been using her powers. The girl immediately checked herself out and said there were no changes. Nox was stoked that her hearing aid was waterproof. He held out his hand and suggested she get changed and dry off. Lunathia smiled and agreed, since her whole outfit was soaked. After a while, they could finally relax in their cabin. Lunathia thoughtfully thanked Nox for pulling her out of the water and saving her. She said with a smile that Mr. Nox had saved her again. To her surprise, the man replied that she'd saved his life first. He remembered that if she hadn't yelled back then, he would have been a goner. He also said that it's only natural for a husband to help his wife out. The guy said it with so much conviction that Lunathia felt all warm and fuzzy again. She smiled and said that in that case, a wife should help her husband too. She got lost in thought and said it was awful to experience a world without feelings. She knew that tragic day of deprivation was getting closer and closer. Lunathia confessed again that her desire to live with Nox hadn't changed. She felt like she was drowning again, which is why she decided to tell him all this. He was so overcome with emotion that he just grabbed Lunathia and hugged her tight. Looks like she totally wasn't expecting that sudden burst of affection. Those words were hard for him to say, but he promised he'd find the moonflower. In the end, they actually pulled off the mission to meet up with the allies. Later on, Gendal put a bounty on the pirates who were causing all the trouble. After that, Nox declared he wouldn't take any more requests from him. Even so, Prince Gendal still didn't seem to have a care in the world. After some time, the night of the full moon finally arrived. After showing up at the Marquis's banquet, she decided to go looking for moonflowers. She also wanted to keep an eye on what her father and Rosalind were up to. The girl pressed her hand to her heart, wondering if she'd be able to find the flowers. She felt like her own destiny was finally in her hands. Lunathia nearly jumped out of her skin when Sierra shouted her name. The girl turned around, lost in thought, and asked the maid to repeat herself. The maid held out 2 boxes and asked which necklace she preferred. Lunathia said she was fine, but everything felt hazy. After that, she pointed to the box in Sierra's hands. The maid agreed with her choice, saying it matched the dress color perfectly. She promised with gusto to dress her up in the most extravagant way. Lunathia smiled, realizing she finally had people who cared about her. It was these good people who made her want to keep going. Even if everything comes down to tonight, she'll keep believing in the future until the very end. Meanwhile, Mr. Knox was already fully prepared for the banquet. Lunathia thanked him for his patience and noticed their outfits matched. The guy paused thoughtfully, looking right into her eyes. Urine repeated the compliment that Knox should have given her. Even though Knox wasn't as smooth, she still appreciated the attention. She agreed with him, saying she really did look cute. She added that she hated to part ways so soon. Lunathia knew she'd have to change into something lighter before searching for the moon meadow. Knox was really trying his best to be present at this fancy dinner. Right now, she was holding his hand while he called tonight's special. He looked at his wife, a determined glint in his eye, and suggested they move on. Urine waved and said he'd catch up with them later. He told them to go ahead and enjoy dinner first. After that, the newlyweds headed to the carriage to go to the dinner party. She froze when the Marquise suddenly started talking about her dress. Knox leaned in close to her ear and said it looked amazing on her. Then he turned away like it was no big deal, almost like he was afraid of her reaction. Lunathia gave him a genuine smile and thanked him for the compliment. After a while, they finally arrived at the venue. Lunathia was thrilled by this wonderful event and so many guests. They also noticed that the imperial family's security detail was heavily armed. Lunathia was relieved to see the empress looking so well. She scanned the room, a little worried about who else might be here. Lunathia spotted her dad, looking happy, and her mom, who'd lost a little weight. It instantly made her think about Soli and Cynthia being back home. What really bugged her, though, was Rosalind acting so weird. They turned around when they heard Knox, her little brother, calling out cheerfully. She gave a respectful bow and thanked him for the invite. He just said it was Ruby who invited them, and she'd be by soon. The Lord was also happy that Knox had joined them. Lunathia noticed the Lord was suddenly flustered, like he had something to confess. The girl's eyes went wide when she heard the Lord's mother was here too. The next thing she knew, that woman was calling him over. She asked who he was talking to with this nasty tone, like she was declaring all-out war.